Hello and welcome. Tonight, we journey to the Andes Mountains in August 1947 to the final minutes of a flight that should have been routine but became one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. We travel to the cold, thin air above the highest peaks of South America to witness a vanishing that would remain unexplained for 50 years, a mystery marked by a single cryptic word that has puzzled linguists, aviation experts, and historians ever since. Before we begin, if you enjoy these deep explorations of historical mysteries, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you find yourself drifting off during this telling, that is not only acceptable but intended. Let the story wash over you. Let the details accumulate like snow. This is boring history, told slowly, for rest. The cockpit of a 4-engine Avro Lancastrian airliner flying eastward over the Andes on the afternoon of August 2nd, 1947. The aircraft is named Stardust. It carries 11 people, 5 crew members and 6 passengers. They're flying from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to Santiago, Chile, crossing the massive spine of the Andes Mountains at over 20,000 feet. Outside the cockpit windows, snow-covered peaks stretch endlessly. Inside, the crew works methodically, monitoring instruments, maintaining altitude, communicating position by radio. At 5:41 p.m. local time, the radio operator sends a routine position report to Santiago Tower. The plane is approaching its destination, beginning descent toward the airport. Expected arrival, 5:45 p.m., just 4 minutes away. Everything is normal, routine, under control. Then, at 5:42 p.m., the radio operator sends one final message in Morse code. The message consists of a single word, tapped out clearly, repeated twice for confirmation, STENDEC, and then silence. Stardust never arrives in Santiago. The plane vanishes completely, as if it flew into another dimension. For 50 years, despite extensive searches, not a single piece of wreckage is found. The 11 people aboard simply cease to exist in the known world. The word STENDEC, meaningless in any language, unexplained by any standard aviation terminology, becomes one of the most famous unsolved codes in history. Now, settle in. Let the modern world fade away. We're about to explore a mystery that combines aviation tragedy, cryptographic puzzle, and the strange preservation of evidence by glacial ice. This is the story of Stardust, the plane that vanished into the Andes and emerged 50 years later, bringing answers to some questions while leaving others forever mysterious. This is the story of STENDEC. Stardust began its life not as a civilian airliner, but as a military aircraft. The plane was an Avro Lancastrian, essentially a converted Lancaster bomber, one of Britain's most successful heavy bombers during World War II. When the war ended in 1945, hundreds of Lancaster bombers suddenly had no military purpose. Aviation companies converted many of them for civilian use, removing gun turrets and bomb bays, installing passenger seats and windows, transforming weapons of war into tools of commerce. The Lancastrian as a passenger aircraft. It retains the Lancaster's distinctive silhouette, long fuselage, high wings, 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. But where gun turrets once bristled, there are now streamlined fairings. Where bombs once hung, there's cargo space and passenger accommodation. The conversion is practical rather than elegant. These planes are workhorses, not luxury liners. They're pressurized only in the cockpit area. Passengers sit in an unpressurized cabin that grows bitterly cold at high altitude. They wear oxygen masks during high-altitude flights. It's uncomfortable, but in 1947, it's the price of rapid long-distance travel. Stardust, registered as GAGWH, entered service with British South American Airways BSAA in 1946. The airline was founded to operate routes between Britain and South America, particularly to Argentina and Chile. These routes cross the Atlantic and then, crucially, cross the Andes Mountains, one of the world's most formidable natural barriers. The Andes stretch nearly 5,000 miles along South America's western edge, with peaks reaching over 20,000 feet. Flying over them requires skill, planning, and respect for the mountain's deadly weather patterns. Imagine the route Stardust typically flew, from London to Buenos Aires via Dakar in West Africa and across the South Atlantic. Then, the most challenging leg, Buenos Aires to Santiago, crossing the Andes. The distance is relatively short, about 700 miles, but the mountains make it dangerous. Pilots must climb to over 20,000 feet to clear the highest peaks. At that altitude, weather changes rapidly. Winds can reach hurricane strength. Clouds obscure mountains. Ice forms on wings. One navigation error, one mechanical problem, one miscalculation, and an aircraft can fly directly into a mountain before the crew realizes their mistake. The crew of Stardust, on August 2nd, 1947, are experienced professionals. Captain Reginald Cook is the pilot in command, a veteran of the Royal Air Force with thousands of flying hours, including extensive combat experience during the war. First Officer Norman Cook, no relation to the captain, serves as co-pilot. Dennis Harmer is the radio operator, responsible for maintaining communication with ground stations. The flight engineer and navigator complete the five-man crew. These aren't novices. They're skilled airmen who've flown this route before and understand its dangers. The 6 passengers boarding Stardust in Buenos Aires on the morning of August 2nd. They're a diverse group, united by the need to reach Santiago. There's a Palestinian businessman returning from Argentina, a British diplomat and his wife, a German woman traveling to reunite with her husband, a Swiss woman whose husband works in Chile. Each has their own reasons for flying, their own plans for arrival in Santiago. Each boards Stardust expecting a routine, if uncomfortable, flight of about 3 hours. None suspects this will be their final journey. The weather on August 2nd is concerning but not prohibitive. The Andes in winter, August is winter, in the southern hemisphere are always dangerous. Strong winds, heavy clouds, snowstorms, ice, but flights cross regularly when conditions permit. Stardust's crew reviews the weather reports. They decide the flight is feasible. At 1:46 p.m. local time, Stardust takes off from Morón Airport near Buenos Aires, heading west toward the mountains. The flight in its early stages. Stardust climbs steadily, the 4 Merlin engines roaring, propellers spinning, aircraft gaining altitude as it approaches the Andes. Below, the Argentine pampas stretch flat and endless. Ahead, the mountains rise like a wall, snow-covered peaks gleaming in winter sunlight. The passengers sit in their cold cabin, wearing oxygen masks as altitude increases, trying to stay comfortable despite the unpressurized environment. The crew works methodically, monitoring instruments, checking navigation, maintaining radio contact with ground stations. The Andes crossing requires precise navigation. There's a standard route through the mountains, following valleys where possible, climbing high enough to clear peaks. But the mountains create their own weather. Winds racing over peaks can reach 200 miles per hour. These winds create severe turbulence and can blow aircraft off course. Clouds clinging to mountains can hide peaks until it's too late to avoid them. Ice forming on wings can reduce lift dangerously. Flying the Andes in 1947 is serious business, requiring constant attention and careful decision-making. Picture Stardust approaching the mountain range. The crew has been monitoring weather, adjusting course as needed, climbing to sufficient altitude. They're in communication with Santiago, reporting position regularly. Everything seems under control. The aircraft is performing normally. The crew is experienced. The route is familiar. At 5:41 p.m., radio operator Dennis Harmer sends a routine position report to Santiago Tower. The message gives their position and expected arrival time. 5:45 p.m. Just 4 minutes away. The flight is nearly over. Santiago Airport is preparing for their arrival. At 5:42 p.m., Dennis Harmer sends another message. This one is different. It's not a position report or a routine communication. It's a single word, transmitted in Morse code, repeated twice. STENDEC. And then nothing. Silence. Stardust never makes contact again. The aircraft never appears on Santiago's horizon. 5:45 p.m. passes with no landing. 5:50, 6 p.m., 6:30. The sun sets behind the Andes. Darkness falls. Stardust doesn't arrive. The aircraft, with its 11 occupants, has vanished somewhere over the mountains. And the last word they sent, STENDEC, means nothing to anyone who received it. The Morse code messages transmitted by Stardust in its final minutes have been preserved in Santiago Tower's logs. Understanding these messages, what they say and what they don't say, is crucial to understanding both what happened to the aircraft and the enduring mystery of STENDEC. The radio room at Santiago Airport on the afternoon of August 2nd, 1947. It's a small room with radio equipment receivers, transmitters, logbooks for recording messages. The radio operator on duty monitors frequencies used by incoming aircraft. He expects Stardust shortly. The flight departed Buenos Aires hours ago and should arrive soon. He listens for their transmissions, ready to provide landing instructions, weather information, whatever the crew needs. At 5:41 p.m., Stardust's transmission comes through. The Morse code is clear, tapped out at professional speed by radio operator Dennis Harmer aboard the aircraft. The message reads, ETA Santiago 545, followed by position information. ETA means estimated time of arrival. Stardust expects to land at Santiago at 5:45 p.m., just 4 minutes away. This is excellent news. The flight is on schedule, nearly complete, approaching landing. The Santiago operator receiving this message. He logs it carefully, notes the time, acknowledges receipt. 4 minutes until Stardust arrives. He alerts the airport that the flight is approaching. Ground crew prepare for landing. Everything is routine. He waits for Stardust to appear, for the next transmission requesting landing instructions. The minutes tick by. 5:42 p.m., 5:43, 5:44, and then another transmission arrives. At 5:42 p.m., 1 minute after the previous message, Dennis Harmer transmits again. This message is different. It's shorter. Just one word, transmitted clearly in Morse code. The Santiago operator copies it down. STENDEC. He's confused. STENDEC isn't a standard aviation term. It's not an abbreviation he recognizes. It's not an emergency code. What does it mean? Perhaps he copied it wrong. He requests clarification, asking Stardust to repeat their message. Picture Dennis Harmer aboard Stardust, receiving Santiago's request for clarification. He's confused that they didn't understand. The message was clear. He transmits again, more slowly, more deliberately. The Morse code for STENDEC comes through clearly. Dit 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 da dit 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 da dit dit da da. STENDEC. The Santiago operator copies it again. Same word. STENDEC. He acknowledges receipt but remains baffled. What does it mean? What is Stardust trying to communicate? And then nothing. Stardust doesn't transmit again. The Santiago operator waits. 5:45 p.m. arrives. Stardust's estimated landing time. No aircraft appears. He waits longer. 5:50. 6 p.m. He tries calling Stardust repeatedly, transmitting their call sign, requesting response. Silence. The radio frequency is empty. Stardust has gone silent. The aircraft doesn't land. Hours pass. Night falls. Stardust has vanished. And the last word they transmitted, STENDEC, remains unexplained. Trying to understand STENDEC with no context. You're the Santiago radio operator. You've received this word twice, clearly transmitted, but it means nothing in Spanish, nothing in English. It's not an aviation abbreviation you recognize. Is it a code? An acronym? A garbled attempt at something else? You check aviation references, Ask colleagues, search for any explanation. Nothing. STENDEC is meaningless. Yet Stardust transmitted it deliberately twice as their final message. Why? The standard aviation codes and abbreviations of 1947 are well documented. Pilots and radio operators use standardized language to ensure clear communication across languages and nationalities. Emergency codes exist: SOS in Morse code for distress at sea, Mayday in voice radio for aircraft emergencies. Position reports follow specific formats. Weather information uses standard codes. STENDEC fits none of these patterns. It's not a standard code, not a recognized abbreviation, not a distress signal. It's simply incomprehensible. The hours after Stardust's disappearance, as confusion becomes concern, becomes alarm. The aircraft is overdue. Radio calls receive no response. Stardust has vanished somewhere between Buenos Aires and Santiago. But where? The Andes cover vast territory. The flight path crosses hundreds of miles of mountains. Without knowing where the aircraft went silent, without having any distress calls indicating problems, searchers don't know where to begin looking. The mountains could be hiding wreckage anywhere across hundreds of square miles. Emergency procedures activate. Argentine and Chilean aviation authorities are notified. British South American Airways contacts families. Search and rescue operations prepare to launch at first light. Searching in darkness over the Andes is impossible and suicidal. Everyone hopes Stardust made an emergency landing somewhere, that the crew and passengers are alive, that rescue is possible. But as hours pass without contact, hope diminishes. Something terrible has happened. STENDEC hangs over everything, the cryptic final word, unexplained, possibly holding the key to understanding what happened. The STENDEC mystery compounds the tragedy. If Stardust had simply vanished without sending any final message, it would be straightforward tragedy, an aircraft lost in mountains, cause unknown but probably weather or navigation error. But STENDEC transforms it into puzzle. What was Dennis Harmer trying to communicate? Was it a warning, a position report in code, a distress signal, an error? The word's meaninglessness makes every theory possible and none provable. Imagine being family members of those aboard Stardust, learning of the disappearance and the cryptic final message. Your loved one is missing, somewhere in the Andes. The last thing transmitted from the plane was a meaningless word. What does it mean? Does it explain what happened? Does it give hope they're alive? Or does it simply deepen the mystery without providing any useful information? STENDEC becomes both clue and obstacle. It should mean something, but no one can determine what. In the days following the disappearance, STENDEC appears in newspapers worldwide. The mystery captures public imagination. A single cryptic word, transmitted clearly twice, that means nothing in any language. People speculate. Linguists analyze. Aviation experts theorize. Is it an acronym? A code? A mistake? Each theory has adherents. None can be proven. STENDEC enters the lexicon of aviation mysteries, joining other famous last messages and unexplained phenomena. The word becomes shorthand for the entire mystery. When people say STENDEC, they mean the whole Stardust disappearance, the unsolved puzzle, the frustrating incomprehensibility of it all. The search for Stardust began at dawn on August 3rd, 1947, just hours after the aircraft vanished. Argentine and Chilean military aircraft took off to search the Andes along Stardust's presumed route. They flew through valleys, circled peaks, looked for any sign of wreckage, smoke from fires, debris scattered on snow, pieces of metal glinting in sunlight. They found nothing. The challenge facing searchers. The Andes are enormous hundreds of miles of mountains, most inaccessible except by air. Stardust could have crashed anywhere along a route covering several hundred miles. Weather in the mountains changes constantly. One day might be clear enough for searching. The next brings storms that ground aircraft. Snow falls, covering any wreckage that might be visible. The mountains are hostile to both the missing aircraft and to those searching for it. Search aircraft flew grid patterns, methodically covering territory. Pilots scanned snowfields and glaciers for anything unusual. They photographed suspicious areas for later analysis. They dropped to dangerous low altitudes to examine terrain more closely. Despite their efforts, days passed without finding anything. A week became 2 weeks. 2 weeks became a month. No wreckage, no survivors, no bodies, no debris. Stardust had vanished completely, being family members during this search. Hope alternates with despair. Each day brings possibility that wreckage will be found, that questions will be answered. But each day ends with nothing. The mountains have swallowed stardust without leaving traces. The waiting becomes unbearable. Hope fades. Acceptance of loss begins, though without bodies to bury, without wreckage to examine, closure remains impossible. By September, active aerial searching scaled back. Aircraft had covered the most likely crash zones repeatedly. Either stardust wasn't where searchers expected, or wreckage was concealed so thoroughly that aerial observation couldn't detect it. The official search concluded without finding anything. Stardust joined the list of aircraft lost without trace, vanished into mountains or oceans, never recovered, mysteries unsolved. But unofficial searching continued. Mountaineers climbing in the high Andes kept eyes open for wreckage. Local people living near the mountains reported anything unusual. Rumors circulated someone had seen debris, heard an explosion, found pieces of metal. Each rumor was investigated. Each proved false or inconclusive. Years passed. Stardust became history rather than current tragedy. The search effectively ended, though technically the aircraft remained listed as missing, fate unknown. Picture the families living with unresolved loss. They held memorial services without bodies to bury. They mourned without certainty their loved ones were dead, though rationally. Survival after all this time was impossible. They kept photographs, letters, belongings of those who vanished. They wondered where in the Andes their family members lay. They lived with questions that had no answers. STENDEC haunted them, that meaningless final word that might have explained everything but explained nothing. The disappearance of stardust created void that human imagination rushed to fill. Without wreckage, without bodies, without evidence, theories multiplied. Each decade brought new explanations, reflecting fears and fascinations of the times. The 1,940 seconds and 50 seconds saw flying saucer theories. The Cold War years brought espionage speculation. Aviation experts proposed technical failures. Meteorologists suggested atmospheric phenomena. Linguists analyzed STENDEC from every angle. For 50 years, stardust remained blank canvas onto which people projected their theories, their hopes, their need to explain the inexplicable. First theories emerging in late 1947. World War II had ended barely 2 years before. People had become accustomed to secret weapons, covert operations, technological surprises. Radar was new. Jet aircraft were new. Atomic bombs had revealed that impossible things were possible. When stardust vanished and sent strange final message, some immediately suspected something extraordinary, something beyond normal aircraft accidents. The UFO theories came quickly. 1947 was the year of Kenneth Arnold's flying saucer sighting, the beginning of modern UFO era. Arnold saw mysterious aircraft over Washington state in June, just 2 months before stardust disappeared. The Roswell incident occurred in July. By August, flying saucers were international phenomenon, subject of intense public interest and wild speculation. When stardust vanished with cryptic final message, UFO enthusiasts had ready explanation: alien abduction or attack. Believers constructing this scenario. Stardust encountered alien spacecraft while flying over Andes. Perhaps aliens were attracted by the aircraft's radio signals. Perhaps they were monitoring human aviation. The crew saw something extraordinary, tried to report it, but their transmission was garbled either by electromagnetic interference from the UFO or by their own shock at what they witnessed. STENDEC was corrupted message, attempt to report star disk or sky disk, their description of alien craft. The aircraft was then seized, abducted, taken elsewhere. This explained why no wreckage was ever found. The Andes themselves were irrelevant. Stardust never crashed into mountains at all. This theory gained surprising traction in popular culture. Books about flying saucers mentioned stardust. Magazine articles listed it among unexplained disappearances. The combination of mysterious last message and total disappearance made it perfect UFO case impossible to prove, impossible to disprove, endlessly fascinating to those who wanted to believe. Even decades later, some UFO researchers continued citing stardust as evidence of alien activity, despite complete lack of supporting evidence. Imagine more sinister theories that emerged from Cold War paranoia. Stardust was British aircraft, operated by British Airline, carrying British passengers, but it was flying in South America, region where allegiances were uncertain, where Nazi war criminals had fled, where espionage networks operated. Could Stardust have been sabotaged? Could someone aboard, passenger or crew, have been spy or assassin? Could STENDEC have been code word, signal to Confederates on ground? The sabotage theories took several forms. One version suggested bomb aboard, planted by agents seeking to eliminate specific passenger, perhaps someone carrying sensitive information, perhaps someone who knew too much about wartime operations. The explosion destroyed aircraft utterly, explained why no large wreckage pieces were found. STENDEC was coded message from saboteur, confirmation that mission was accomplished, transmitted just before detonation. Theorists examining passenger list, searching for suspicious individuals. Was anyone connected to intelligence services? Did anyone have reason to flee or be eliminated? The passenger manifest included businessmen, a diplomat, a courier. Any of them might have carried secrets. Any of them might have been target. The theory could never be proven without wreckage, without bodies, without evidence, but neither could it be entirely dismissed. Another sabotage variant suggested crew member was compromised. Perhaps radio operator Dennis Harmer was spy, sent STENDEC as coded message just before deliberately crashing aircraft. Perhaps someone threatened his family, forced him to cooperate. Perhaps he was fanatic, motivated by ideology rather than money. This explained the calm tone of earlier transmissions, deliberate deception, making everything seem normal until final moments. Investigators reviewing Harmer's background, searching for connections, motives, vulnerabilities. They found nothing suspicious. He was experienced radio operator with clean record, no financial troubles, no extremist associations, no reason to destroy aircraft and kill himself along with passengers and crew. But absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence, true believers argued. Good spy leaves no traces. Effective saboteur appears completely normal. The theory persisted among those predisposed to see conspiracy everywhere. Aviation experts proposed less dramatic but more plausible theories centered on pilot error and technical failure. These theories assumed Stardust had crashed in mountains that much was obvious, given failure to arrive and complete disappearance. Question was, why experienced crew flying proven aircraft on familiar route would fly into mountain peak? Picture one common theory. Navigation error caused by extreme winds. The Andes create some of world's most violent mountain wave conditions. Westerly winds crossing mountain range can accelerate dramatically, creating jet stream effects at high altitude. If Stardust encountered unexpectedly strong headwind, aircraft's ground speed would be much slower than airspeed. Crew would believe they had traveled farther than they actually had. When they began descent towards Santiago, thinking they had crossed mountains, they were actually still over high peaks. Crew in cockpit, checking calculations, convinced they are safely past Tupungato. Captain Cook initiates descent. Radio operator sends position report, announces estimated arrival time. Everything seems normal. They are flying in cloud, no ground visibility, relying entirely on dead reckoning navigation time, speed, and heading calculations. But their ground speed has been reduced by powerful headwinds they couldn't detect without ground reference. They are miles behind where they believe themselves to be. They descend directly into mountain they think is behind them. This theory explained, sudden disappearance, high-speed impact with mountain, would destroy aircraft almost instantly, kill everyone aboard without time for distress call. It explained why wreckage wasn't found, debris would be scattered on remote Glacier, covered by snow within days. It was consistent with weather conditions that day, strong westerly winds at altitude, clouds obscuring visibility. It required no sabotage, no UFOs, no conspiracies, just tragic miscalculation combined with violent winds and unfortunate timing. But it didn't explain STENDEC. That remained puzzle within puzzle. If theory was correct, crew didn't know they were about to crash. They thought everything was normal. Why send cryptic final message? Unless STENDEC had nothing to do with crash, was separate mystery, coincidental anomaly in otherwise straightforward accident. Another pilot error theory, oxygen deprivation affecting crew judgment. Stardust was flying unpressurized at high altitude, likely 24,000 feet to clear Andean peaks. At that altitude, without supplemental oxygen, hypoxia develops quickly. Symptoms include confusion, poor judgment, impaired decision-making, sometimes euphoria that makes sufferers unaware they're in danger. Could entire crew have been hypoxic? Could oxygen system have failed without crew noticing? Imagine crew growing increasingly confused as oxygen deprivation affected their brains. They might continue normal procedures while thinking became fuzzy, reactions slowed, judgment deteriorated. Radio operator might make errors transposing letters, inventing words, sending gibberish while believing message made perfect sense. Pilots might descend prematurely, navigate carelessly, fail to recognize danger signs. They would fly confidently into mountain, brains too starved of oxygen to realize their mistake until impact. This theory had appeal. It explained both crash and strange message with single systemic failure. But it had problems. Other crew members would likely notice if colleagues seemed confused. Standard procedures included oxygen checks. Previous transmissions had been completely normal. Hypoxia typically develops gradually, not suddenly affecting everyone simultaneously. Theory was possible but required multiple coincidental failures. Weather-based theories that focused on atmospheric conditions rather than human error. The Andes create extraordinary meteorological phenomena. Lenticular clouds form in stable layers. Severe turbulence develops in mountain waves. Downdrafts can exceed any aircraft's climb capability. Clear air turbulence can strike without warning. Could Stardust have encountered something so violent that aircraft was torn apart or forced into mountain before crew could react? Aircraft encountering severe mountain wave turbulence while in cloud. Violent updraft throws them hundreds of feet upward, then downdraft plunges them toward terrain. Pilots fight controls, trying to maintain altitude, but forces are overwhelming. Aircraft is tossed like leaf in hurricane. Radio operator tries to send distress call, but turbulence is so severe he can barely operate equipment. Message comes out garbled STENDEC instead of intended words. Seconds later, aircraft impacts mountain at high speed. Entire sequence takes less than minute. No time for detailed mayday, just cryptic fragment before silence. This scenario was aeronautically plausible. Lancastrian was robust aircraft, but not invincible. Severe enough turbulence could exceed structural limits. Mountain wave conditions on that route were known to be dangerous. Theory explained sudden nature of disaster and inability to send clear distress message. But like other theories, it couldn't be confirmed without wreckage. Picture theorists becoming more creative as years passed without resolution. Some suggested Stardust had accidentally entered restricted military airspace and been shot down. Wreckage secretly recovered to hide international incident. Others proposed crew had become lost in storm, exhausted fuel flying in circles, crashed far from expected location in remote area never searched. Still, others imagined aircraft had developed structural failure, wing separation, tail damage that made controlled flight impossible but allowed time for cryptic radio message before inevitable crash. Families of victims hearing all these theories, reading speculation in newspapers and magazines, listening to armchair investigators claim to know what happened. Each new theory reopened wounds. Each explanation seemed plausible but unprovable. Some families wanted to believe most hopeful scenarios: quick death on impact, no suffering. Others tortured themselves imagining worst possibilities: slow crash, survivors dying gradually in wreckage, final moments of terror as aircraft plunged toward mountain. As decades passed, theories evolved with times. 1,960 seconds brought new speculation about magnetic anomalies affecting navigation instruments. 1,970 seconds saw revival of sabotage theories connected to newly revealed CIA operations. 1,980 seconds brought computer modeling attempts to calculate most likely crash location. Each generation brought new tools, new perspectives, new explanations, but without evidence, all theories remained equally valid and equally unproven. How STENDEC itself generated linguistic theories independent of crash speculation. Codebreakers analyzed it, cryptographers attempted decryption, language experts proposed translations. Each analysis revealed more possibilities, none conclusive. Was it acronym, anagram, misheard message, operator error, atmospheric corruption? The 5 letters became most analyzed radio transmission in aviation history, a subject of more scholarly attention than messages that actually meant something. By 1,990 seconds, Stardust had become aviation legend, mentioned alongside Amelia Earhart and Bermuda Triangle disappearances. Books devoted chapters to mystery. Television documentaries recreated final flight. Internet forums debated theories endlessly. The case had everything that makes mystery compelling: unexplained disappearance, cryptic final message, experienced crew, proven aircraft, multiple theories, no resolution. It became cultural touchstone, referenced whenever discussing unsolved mysteries or strange radio transmissions. Imagine researchers and enthusiasts accumulating files of clippings, maps, calculations, theories. Some became obsessed, devoting years to solving mystery. They contacted meteorologists about that day's wind conditions. They interviewed relatives of crew and passengers. They studied mountain topography. They analyzed radio transmission records. They flew over Andes in small aircraft, searching for wreckage. They were convinced answer existed, that with enough research and right insight, mystery would yield its secrets. But 50 years passed without breakthrough. Stardust remained lost. STENDEC remained unexplained. Mountains kept their secret. Theories multiplied, but truth remained hidden. The mystery seemed destined to endure forever, unsolved and unsolvable. Testament to how completely aircraft could vanish into vast mountain wilderness. Until 1998, when Glacier finally released what it had held for 5 decades. The first researchers in 1947 and early 1948 attempting systematic analysis of STENDEC. British aviation authorities established a committee to investigate disappearance. They examined every possibility methodically. Could STENDEC be code word? They checked all aviation codes, all meteorological codes, all military codes available to civilian operators. Nothing matched. Could it be abbreviation? They listed every possible expansion of letters. None made sense in context of routine position report. Could it be foreign language? They consulted linguists familiar with Spanish, Portuguese, indigenous languages of South America. No matches found. Committee members sitting in London office, surrounded by files and maps, drinking tea and smoking pipes, puzzling over 5 letters that defeated all analysis. They were experienced investigators. They had solved other aircraft accidents. They had explained crashes that seemed mysterious initially. But STENDEC resisted every analytical tool they possessed. It was like word from unknown language, like message from different world. Committee eventually published reports stating crash location unknown, cause undetermined, final message unexplained. File remained open officially, but investigation effectively ended. Picture families dealing with not knowing. Imagine wife of passenger reading newspaper accounts of theories, wondering which might be true. Did her husband die in UFO encounter? In sabotage? In navigation error? Each theory suggested different final moments, different experiences, different understandings of what happened. She oscillated between theories, believing each temporarily, rejecting each as inadequate. Theories provided no comfort because they provided no certainty. She wanted to know what happened, not what might have happened, but might was all anyone could offer. Journalists covering story in 1,940 seconds and 50 seconds, drawn to mystery's combination of modern aviation and inexplicable disappearance. They interviewed aviation experts, meteorologists, military personnel, anyone who might shed light. They published articles with dramatic headlines. Mystery of the flying saucer crash. The aircraft that vanished into thin air. STENDEC. The message from nowhere. Each article advanced theories, some wild, some plausible, none provable. Public ate it up. Mystery sold newspapers. Speculation filled radio programs. Stardust became cultural phenomenon, amateur investigators becoming obsessed with case. One man in London spent years compiling dossier on Stardust, collecting every newspaper clipping, interviewing anyone connected to flight, developing elaborate theory involving secret military cargo. Another researcher in Argentina organized private expeditions to Andes, convinced he could find wreckage where official searches had failed. Woman in Canada claimed psychic visions showed her crash location, wrote detailed letters to authorities describing what she saw. Each investigator was certain they had answer. Each was wrong, or at least unprovable. Imagine how Cold War added layer of paranoia to theories. By 1,950 seconds, East-West tensions dominated thinking. Every unexplained event became potential espionage. Some theorists suggested Stardust had been carrying defector from Eastern Europe, targeted for elimination. Others proposed aircraft was hijacked by communist agents, flown to secret base, passengers imprisoned or killed. Still others imagined crew were spies, deliberately crashed aircraft to fake their deaths, now living under assumed names in USSR. These theories required elaborate conspiracies but seemed plausible in atmosphere of suspicion. Code-breaking enthusiasts attempting to decrypt STENDEC using increasingly exotic methods. They tried book codes using Bible passages. They tried numerical substitutions using dates and coordinates. They tried polyalphabetic ciphers requiring complex keys. They tried every encryption method known to 1,940 seconds cryptography. Nothing worked. Either STENDEC wasn't encrypted, or encryption was so sophisticated that decades of analysis couldn't break it. More likely, STENDEC wasn't encrypted at all, was simply error, accident, or message whose context was lost. Aviation safety investigators studying Stardust case for lessons about navigation over mountains. Even without wreckage, case illustrated dangers. Aircraft flying in clouds over peaks with only dead-reckoning navigation was inherently risky. Severe winds could create large position errors. Recommendations emerged. Better altitude requirements for mountain routes, more conservative position estimates, mandatory position reports at specific landmarks. Stardust disappearance, even unexplained, contributed to improved safety procedures. Other crews would benefit from lessons learned, even if learning came from mystery rather than certainty. Picture meteorologists in 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds developing better understanding of mountain wave phenomena. They used new instruments, radar wind profilers, high-altitude weather balloons, satellite observations to map wind patterns over Andes. They discovered jet stream effects could create extreme winds at specific altitudes. They documented cases where aircraft ground speed was reduced dramatically by headwinds. Stardust case fit perfectly into emerging understanding of mountain meteorology. Theory that severe winds caused navigation error became increasingly accepted among meteorologists, even while aircraft location remained unknown. Linguistic experts in 1,980 seconds applying computational analysis to STENDEC. They used early computers to search databases of words, checking millions of possibilities for matches. They analyzed letter frequency patterns. They compared STENDEC to words in dozens of languages. They looked for anagrams systematically. Computers found same results humans had found. No perfect matches, several near matches, nothing conclusive. STENDEC remained enigmatic even when subjected to algorithmic analysis. Mystery resisted both human intuition and computer processing. Theory that stardust had been struck by lightning, destroyed in electrical storm. Proponents pointed to August timing summer in Argentina, storm season in Andes. They noted crew would have had no warning if lightning struck without visible flash. Aircraft could have been torn apart instantly, explaining sudden silence and complete disappearance. Radio message might have been corrupted by electrical interference from storm. Theory was plausible but unprovable without wreckage. And it didn't explain why searches found no debris, even high-altitude debris that would scatter widely after mid-air breakup. Imagine theory that crew had suffered carbon monoxide poisoning from exhaust leak. Symptoms would include confusion, disorientation, impaired judgment, exactly what might cause navigation error, and strange radio message. Crew might have been slowly poisoned during flight, eventually becoming so confused they couldn't navigate properly. Theory explained both crash and STENDEC, but it required gradual failure that should have been noticed earlier in flight. Previous position reports had been normal. Sudden poisoning severe enough to cause instant confusion seemed unlikely. Theory had appeal but faced logical problems. Researchers examining weather patterns specific to August 2, 1947. They obtained whatever meteorological records survived from that date. They found confirmation of strong westerly winds at altitude. They found evidence of possible turbulence. They found conditions consistent with mountain wave formation. But they found no evidence of extreme weather, no reports of severe storms, no unusual atmospheric phenomena, no conditions that would obviously prevent flight. Weather was challenging but not prohibitive. This supported navigation error theory rather than catastrophic weather theory. Families gathering for memorial service in late 1947, months after disappearance. Anglican priest conducting service. Photos of missing displayed. Families weeping. Minister offering words about mystery of divine plan. About souls at rest even when bodies are lost. About faith in face of unanswered questions. Families found small comfort in ritual, but absence of bodies, absence of certainty about what happened, made grief harder. They were mourning disappearance more than confirmed death. Hope still flickered that somehow, somewhere, loved ones might be alive. Rational thought said impossible. Heart said maybe. January 1998. High on eastern slopes of Mount Tupungato, two Argentinian mountaineers are climbing at approximately 15,000 feet elevation. The day is clear, unusual for this part of Andes. Visibility extends for miles. They are moving slowly across Glacier, roped together for safety, when one notices something peculiar protruding from ice. Not rock, not natural, something metallic, something that shouldn't be there. Picture that moment of discovery. Imagine climber approaching the object, curious about what ice has revealed. Glacier ice is not static, it flows slowly downhill, grinding forward inches per year, sometimes feet. It swallows everything in its path, entombs it in frozen prison, then eventually releases it decades or centuries later, as ice moves toward lower elevations where warmer temperatures cause melting. This glacier has been flowing for 50 years, carrying frozen burden downward from higher altitudes. Now, it's beginning to give up its secret. The climber sees twisted metal emerging from blue-white ice. Shape is wrong for climbing equipment or weather station debris. Size is wrong, this is large piece, not small artifact. He moves closer, examining it. Recognition dawns slowly. This is aircraft wreckage. Aluminum skin, recognizable even after decades of glacial burial. Rivets still visible. Structural members bent by enormous force. He calls to his partner. They both stare at unexpected find, minds racing. What aircraft? When did it crash? How long has Glacier held it? Them discussing whether to continue climb or descend immediately to report discovery. They decide to investigate further first. They move carefully across Glacier, searching for more debris. Within 100 yards, they find additional pieces. More twisted aluminum, part of landing gear, unmistakable in its construction. Sections of what might be fuselage. Each piece emerging from ice like fossils from stone, preserved by cold, slowly revealed by Glacier's patient movement. The ice itself. Blue glacier ice, formed from centuries of accumulated snow, compressed under its own weight, until air squeezed out, crystal structure reorganized, color changed from white to translucent blue. The wreckage is partially embedded in this ice, partially exposed where summer melting has removed thin surface layer. More debris is visible deeper in ice, shadow shapes frozen below surface, waiting for further melting to release them. Entire crash site is slowly emerging after 50-year entombment, Glacier acting as time capsule delivering its contents in stages. The climbers take photographs, mark GPS coordinates, note landmarks. They know discovery is significant. Aircraft don't crash at 15,000 feet accidentally. This is high altitude, well above safe minimum. This is wrong place for aircraft to be, unless something went catastrophically wrong. And age of wreckage is obvious, not fresh crash, but old aluminum, weathered but preserved by ice. They continue exploring, documenting, until light begins to fade and safety demands they begin descent. They know they will return. They know authorities must be notified. They know this is important find, though they don't yet realize just how important. Imagine their descent, excitement competing with exhaustion. They discuss theories. What aircraft could this be? They know there have been crashes in Andes over decades, small planes and large, but Tupungato is remote location, not on normal flight paths. They wonder if anyone will believe them. They wonder if discovery has been made before and never reported. They wonder what they'll find if they return with better equipment, more time, proper documentation. Days later, they contact authorities in Mendoza, nearest major city. They report finding aircraft wreckage on Tupungato Glacier. Officials are skeptical at first. Mountains are full of rumors, claimed sightings that prove false. But climbers are credible. Their GPS coordinates are precise. Their photographs are clear. An investigation is launched. Aviation authorities cross-reference location with known crashes. Tupungato, January 1998. Approximately 15,000 feet elevation. High on the glacier. Researchers pulling old files, searching accident records. Several aircraft have crashed in Argentine Andes over decades. They check locations, dates, circumstances. One file keeps drawing attention. Stardust, British airliner, disappeared August 2, 1947. Last reported position was near Tupungato. Never found. 50 years ago, almost exactly. Could this be it? Could Glacier have finally revealed what vanished so completely in 1947? Excitement builds among aviation historians and accident investigators. If wreckage truly is stardust, it would solve one of aviation's enduring mysteries. It would answer questions that have remained open for 5 decades. It would explain what happened to 11 people who vanished into mountains. And possibly it might explain STENDEC, that cryptic final message that has puzzled researchers for 50 years. Planning expedition to investigate site properly. Tupungato is difficult mountain, accessed only by lengthy approach through wilderness. Summer season December through March provides only brief window when weather permits high-altitude work. Expedition requires experienced mountaineers, proper equipment, and funding. Argentine and British authorities coordinate efforts. Families of stardust victims are notified that wreckage possibly found, possibly their loved ones will finally be located, possibly closure will come after 50 years of uncertainty. Picture expedition team assembling equipment in Mendoza. They pack ropes, ice axes, crampons, tents, food, fuel. They include tools for excavating ice shovels, picks, ice screws. They bring cameras, GPS units, evidence bags, documentation supplies. They recruit porters for approach march. They study weather forecasts, seeking optimal window. They review historical information about stardust, what aircraft looked like, what pieces might be identifiable, what they're searching for. February 1998. Expedition reaches Glacier. From valley floor, they hiked for days, crossing rivers, climbing moraines, establishing camps at progressively higher elevations. Now, they stand on Glacier, where climbers made discovery weeks earlier. More wreckage is visible already. Glacier has continued releasing debris. Summer melt has exposed additional pieces. Team members spread out, documenting everything, photographing from multiple angles, recording exact positions. First confirmed identification of wreckage. Inspector examining section of fuselage finds serial number still legible despite 50 years of glacial burial. He cross-references it with records. Match confirmed. This is Avro Lancastrian GAGWH. This is stardust. 50 years after disappearing into mountains, aircraft has been found. Team members feel mixture of triumph and solemnity. They have solved mystery, but they're standing amid gravesite. 11 people died here. Their remains are entombed in this ice somewhere. The excavation work that follows. Team uses tools to carefully chip away ice surrounding visible wreckage. More pieces emerge. They find sections of wings, fragments of engines, parts of fuselage, clearly identifiable as Lancastrian components. Much of wreckage is still embedded deep in Glacier, visible as shadows through translucent ice, but inaccessible without industrial equipment. Recovery of everything would require massive operation, but enough is visible and accessible to confirm identity and reconstruct what happened. Imagine discovering human remains. Searchers find them preserved in ice, mummified by cold, frozen for 5 decades. Not complete bodies. Crash impact was violent. Glacier movement has scattered and disturbed remains, but identifiable as human, still wearing clothing, still bearing personal effects. Each discovery is treated with utmost respect. Remains are carefully excavated, documented, preserved. Team works with reverence, aware these are not archaeological specimens but people, victims who deserve dignity. Personal items emerging from ice. Wallets, watches, jewelry, letters, photographs. Ordinary possessions carried by people who expected normal flight, routine journey, safe arrival in Santiago. These items were frozen instantly when crash occurred, preserved perfectly by ice, unchanged for 50 years. Watch stopped at moment of impact shows time of disaster. Letter in someone's pocket still legible after half-century of glacial storage. Photograph of someone's family remains clear. Faces visible, lives frozen in time. Team members handling these items, thinking about people who owned them, reading address on envelope, seeing person's handwriting, realizing they lived and breathed and had families and futures, all ended in instant when aircraft struck mountain. Personal items make tragedy real in way statistics and abstractions never can. 11 people died here, but now they're not just numbers, they're individuals with faces, names, belongings, stories. Work continues for weeks. Team excavates everything accessible. They recover major aircraft components. They find engines, undercarriage, sections of fuselage large enough to examine for impact damage. They recover human remains from multiple individuals. They find luggage, cargo, mail. They document crash site thoroughly, photographing and mapping everything. When summer season ends and weather deteriorates, they retreat from mountain, bringing recovered items for analysis. Picture families receiving news. Some relatives of 1,947 victims are still alive. Children who lost parents, siblings who lost brothers, spouses who lost husbands. They have lived 50 years with unanswered questions. Now they learn aircraft has been found. Loved ones' fates are confirmed. Remains will be returned for proper burial. Questions that haunted them for 5 decades will finally be answered. Mixture of emotions overwhelms them. Relief, grief, closure, renewed pain. Mystery is solved, but loss is renewed. Public reaction as news spreads. Aviation historians celebrate discovery. Media reports resurrection of 50-year-old mystery. Newspapers run archives, photos of stardust alongside current photos of Glacier wreckage. Television documentaries scramble to cover story. Internet forums buzz with speculation about what wreckage reveals. STENDEC is back in headlines. That strange final message, that inexplicable word. Will wreckage finally explain it? Will investigation solve both mysteries, crash location, and cryptic transmission? The discovery on Tupungato Glacier represents remarkable convergence of circumstances. Climbers happened to be at right location at right time. Glacier happened to release wreckage at that moment, after 50 years of burial. Weather happened to be clear enough for discovery. Had any factor been different route, different year, different visibility, wreckage might have remained hidden for decades more, perhaps century or longer. Glacier preserves, but also conceals. It releases secrets on its own schedule, patient and implacable. Glacier is vast frozen archive, storing history in layers of ice, eventually releasing it downstream as time passes. Stardust entered Glacier at high altitude in 1947. For 50 years, ice flowed slowly downhill, carrying debris with it, grinding it, preserving it, concealing it. By 1998, wreckage had traveled miles from original impact site, descended thousands of feet in elevation, emerged at edge where glacier margin melts. Discovery was not at crash location but at revelation location, where ice gave up its treasure. Imagine if climbers had not noticed that first piece of metal, if they had walked past without investigating, if they had dismissed it as climbing equipment or weather station debris. Wreckage would have continued melting out, but in another year or two, spring avalanches might have buried it, swept it further down mountain, scattered it beyond recognition. Window of discovery was narrow. Timing was fortunate. After 50 years of patience, Glacier revealed its secret at exactly right moment to exactly right observers. The 1,998 discovery transformed Stardust from unsolved mystery to solved crash with remaining mystery. Aircraft location was no longer unknown. Fate of passengers and crew was no longer uncertain. But STENDEC remained unexplained. And now forensic analysis of wreckage could begin, seeking answers about why experienced crew flew into mountain, why no distress call preceded crash, why everything happened as it did. Wreckage held clues that investigators could finally examine. 50 years late, investigation could truly begin. The specific conditions that had to align for discovery to occur. First, Climbers had to choose Tupungato for their expedition, not common choice. Mountain is difficult and remote. Second, they had to take specific route that passed near wreckage location. Different approach would have missed it entirely. Third, weather had to be clear. Clouds would have obscured ice surface, prevented noticing metal fragments. Fourth, season had to be right. Winter snow would bury wreckage. Only summer melt exposed it. Fifth, they had to be attentive, easy to miss small piece of metal on vast glacier. All factors aligned perfectly. Remove any one factor and discovery wouldn't have happened. The glacier's specific mechanics of preservation and revelation. When stardust impacted in 1947, wreckage landed on glacier surface at approximately 17,000 feet elevation. Subsequent snowfall, perhaps 50 feet per year at that altitude, quickly buried everything. Snow compressed into firn under its own weight, then into glacial ice as air was squeezed out. This process took decades. Meanwhile, Glacier was flowing downhill constantly due to gravity and ice plasticity. Flow rate was perhaps 30 to 50 yards per year, slow but inexorable. Wreckage moved with ice, locked in frozen matrix, carried slowly toward lower elevations. Imagine what happened to wreckage during 50 years of glacial transport. Ice flowed around obstacles, deformed under pressure, recrystallized repeatedly. Wreckage experienced enormous compressive forces as thousands of feet of ice accumulated above it. Some pieces were crushed further. Others were separated as ice flowed around them at different rates. Everything was scoured by ice movement, slowly abraded, gradually dispersed across wider area. Yet aluminum survived because it's corrosion resistant. Human remains survived because cold prevented decomposition. Personal effects survived because ice protected them from weather, oxygen, biological decay, the edge of glacier where melting occurs. At lower elevations, where temperatures rise above freezing in summer, glacier begins releasing what it has carried. Ice melts from surface downward, exposing whatever is embedded in upper layers. Meltwater runs off, leaving behind anything heavier than ice. Over course of summers, object gradually emerges, first appearing as dark spot deep in translucent ice, then approaching surface as more ice melts, finally breaking free and lying on glacier surface, released after decades of frozen captivity. This is what happened to Stardust Wreckage Glacier, delivered it to emergent zone in 1998. The mountaineers' expertise that enabled them to recognize significance of their find. These were not casual hikers, but experienced climbers familiar with mountains, with normal glacier contents, with what belongs and what doesn't. They knew rocks from metal instantly. They recognized manufactured objects from natural features. They understood significance of aircraft wreckage at 15,000 feet. Had discovery been made by less experienced people, might have been dismissed as old weather station equipment or abandoned climbing gear. But these climbers knew what they had found mattered, knew it needed to be reported, knew it would interest authorities. Picture the specific personal effects that emerged from ice, each one telling human story. Wallet containing British pounds and Argentine pesos currency from 1947, still exchangeable, testament to international travel of era. Wristwatch stopped at 5:41, either moment of impact or time when mainspring finally unwound after crash. Wedding ring engraved with initials and date someone's marriage, memorialized in gold, surviving owner's death. Fountain pen with ink still preserved, person carried it to write letters, never wrote another word. Passport with 1,947 photograph, face frozen at younger age than person ever lived to be. Each item achingly personal, painfully ordinary, profoundly sad. Forensic anthropologists examining human remains with mixture of scientific detachment and emotional awareness. These were people, not specimens. They deserved dignity in death, as in life. Anthropologists worked carefully, documenting everything, treating remains with utmost respect. They noted evidence of instant death, no defensive injuries, no signs of struggling, no indication of post-crash survival. Death came instantly when aircraft struck mountain, one moment alive, next moment not. This was small comfort to families, but genuine comfort nonetheless. Loved ones suffered nothing. Disaster was instantaneous. The logistics of high-altitude excavation. Team had to work at 15,000 feet, where oxygen is thin, temperature is cold, weather is unpredictable. They could only work during daylight hours in relatively calm weather. They had to melt ice carefully to release embedded pieces, using portable heaters and hot water when available, ice axes and shovels when not. They had to catalogue everything, photograph everything from multiple angles, record exact positions with GPS. They had to pack recovered items carefully for transport down mountain. Work was exhausting, dangerous, emotionally draining, but it was necessary. These people deserved to be recovered, to be returned to families, to be properly buried. Imagine bringing recovered remains down from mountain. Team constructed makeshift stretchers, secured bundles carefully, began long descent through wilderness. Each step downward was carefully placed. Slip could be fatal. Altitude made work exhausting. Cold sapped energy. But determination drove them forward. They were bringing people home after 50 years. They were closing chapter that had remained open for half-century. They were giving families what they needed: confirmation, remains, closure. Descent took days. Eventually they reached civilization, transferred remains to proper authorities, completed their mission. News spreading rapidly in early internet age of 1998. Email and early websites spread word internationally within hours. Aviation history forums buzzed with excitement. Families were notified officially before news became public. Media contacted family members for reactions. Television stations prepared documentaries. Newspapers wrote feature articles. Story had everything media loved. Decades-old mystery, dramatic discovery, human interest angle, cryptic unsolved element. Stardust was front-page news again, 50 years after disappearance, this time with partial answers rather than total mystery. A specific moment when British authorities confirmed identity of wreckage to families. Phone calls made, letters sent, meetings arranged. Official language trying to be both informative and compassionate. We regret to inform you that wreckage has been confirmed as stardust. Remains have been recovered. Identifications pending. Further information forthcoming. Families received news with complex emotions. Relief at knowing. Grief reopened. Closure beginning. Pain renewed. After 50 years of not knowing, suddenly they knew. It didn't bring loved ones back. It didn't undo loss. But it provided what only certainty could provide: end to wondering. Picture the specific glaciological studies conducted after discovery. Scientists calculated precise ice flow velocity using GPS markers placed on glacier surface. They measured accumulation rates using ice cores. They modeled wreckage trajectory backward through time, determining original impact site with increasing confidence. They predicted where additional wreckage might emerge in future years as Glacier continued releasing debris. They used stardust as natural experiment in glacial transport of human-scale objects, learning lessons applicable to other mountain glaciers, other preserved sites, other time capsule scenarios. The comparison between 1,947 photographs of intact stardust and 1,998 photographs of glacier wreckage. Same aircraft, separated by 50 years and catastrophic violence. In 1947 photos, sleek airliner, polished aluminum, 4 engines, graceful lines, British registration, GAGWH visible on fuselage. In 1998 photos, twisted fragments, torn metal, crushed components scattered across ice, pieces barely recognizable as aircraft. Comparison was sobering reminder of impact violence, of how completely crash destroyed everything, of how 50 years of ice had further mangled remains, specific technical details that survived and could be examined. Engine serial numbers confirmed these were Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, originally built for wartime bombers, later used in civilian Lancastrians. Propeller blade fragments showed no evidence of rotation at impact. Engines were running but propellers weren't feathered, indicating crew expected normal flight to continue. Fuel system components showed no evidence of exhaustion. Tanks had ruptured on impact, but had contained fuel when crash occurred. Every technical detail supported conclusion that aircraft was functioning normally when it struck mountain. That crash was navigational error rather than mechanical failure. Forensic examination of stardust wreckage began in earnest once recovered pieces reached laboratory facilities. Aviation accident investigators, metallurgists, engineers all brought expertise to analysis. After 50 years of speculation and theory, physical evidence finally existed. Wreckage could tell story that witnesses never could. Metal remembers what happened to it. Deformation patterns reveal forces applied. Fracture surfaces show whether damage occurred from impact or from other causes. Wreckage is witness that cannot lie, though interpreting its testimony requires skill and experience. Picture investigators laying out recovered pieces in hangar, arranging them according to original aircraft configuration. Sections of fuselage here, wing fragments there, engine components in separate area. Each piece labeled, photographed, catalogued. Pattern begins emerging immediately. Every piece shows signs of violent, sudden impact. Metal is torn and twisted. Fractures are fresh, not fatigued. Deformation is consistent with hitting solid object at high speed. No evidence of fire before impact. No evidence of structural failure in flight. No evidence of explosion. No evidence of gradual, controlled descent. Specialists examining fracture surfaces under microscope. Metal grain structure reveals whether break occurred hot or cold, fast or slow, with warning or without. These fractures are cold, fast, and sudden. Impact occurred without warning. Aircraft was flying normally one instant, hitting mountain next instant. Crew had no time to react. No time for controlled crash landing. No time for distress calls beyond what was already transmitted. Impact speed was high, approaching normal cruising velocity, perhaps 180 knots or more. Stardust did not gradually descend into mountain. It flew into it at cruise speed. Reconstruction specialists determining impact orientation. Damage patterns show aircraft hit mountain while flying essentially straight and level, perhaps in very gentle descent. Nose struck first. Cockpit was crushed instantly. Forward fuselage disintegrated. Wings separated and tumbled. Tail section broke away. Everything scattered across Glacier in debris field maybe quarter-mile long. Glacier then slowly swallowed wreckage, covering it with snow that compressed into ice over subsequent years, concealing disaster completely until ice movement brought pieces back to surface 5 decades later. Imagine investigators examining instrument panel fragments. Altimeter, if it could be read, might show altitude at impact. Airspeed indicator might reveal velocity, but instruments are too damaged, needles lost, faces shattered. Radio equipment fragments are recovered, but in pieces too small to reveal anything about final transmission. STENDEC remains unexplained by physical evidence. Whatever radio operator Dennis Harmer intended to communicate, wreckage offers no clues. That mystery persists despite wreckage recovery. Mapping specialists using GPS coordinates of wreckage discovery to backtrack glacier movement. They calculate ice flow velocity, direction, time elapsed since 1947. They project trajectory backward to determine where aircraft originally entered Glacier. Calculation points to impact site approximately 2,000 feet higher up mountain, several miles farther west. Aircraft hit Tupungato's eastern slope at approximately 17,000 feet elevation. It struck peak itself or ridge very close to summit. This was direct impact with mountain's upper reaches. Collision with terrain crew should have cleared easily if navigating correctly. Reconstruction of Stardust's final minutes based on wreckage analysis and known facts. Aircraft was flying westward, having crossed Andes from Mendoza on eastern side towards Santiago on western side. Crew believed they had cleared high peaks and were approaching descent to Santiago Airport. Captain Cook had sent position reports showing expected arrival time. Everything seemed normal, but aircraft was actually still over high terrain, miles behind where crew believed themselves to be. Picture the mountain wave theory gaining strong support from wreckage evidence. Meteorologists examined weather records from August 2, 1947. They found what they expected. Strong westerly winds at altitude, exceeding 50 knots, possibly approaching 70 or 80 knots. These winds created powerful headwind for eastbound Stardust. Aircraft was making perhaps 180 knots airspeed, but ground speed was reduced dramatically, maybe only 100 or 110 knots over ground. Crew calculated their position based on airspeed and elapsed time, assuming normal ground speed. They were wrong by large margin. Cockpit scenario that fits evidence. Captain Cook and first officer checked flight plan. Time elapsed since departure, approximately correct for crossing mountains. Fuel consumed, approximately correct. Heading maintained, correct for reaching Santiago. Everything looked right. They calculated they had passed Tupungato, cleared high peaks, begun approaching coast, time to descend. Time to contact Santiago, announce imminent arrival. Time to begin letdown from cruise altitude. Standard procedure called for descent to be initiated at certain point relative to destination. They believed they were at that point. They were not. Radio operator sending position report and STENDEC message at moment crew began descent. Aircraft was still at altitude, still flying level or in very gentle descent, still behaving normally. No emergency existed. No disaster was imminent from crew's perspective. Everything was routine. Message was sent, whatever it actually meant. Then, perhaps seconds later, mountain appeared. Appeared suddenly because cloud concealed it, because crew wasn't expecting it, because, according to their calculations, they were past it. No time for pull-up, no time for turn, no time for anything except impact. Imagine collision at 180 knots. Nose of Lancastrian strikes rock and ice, metal crumples, cockpit crushes, pilots die instantly. Forward fuselage disintegrates from deceleration forces. Aircraft goes from 180 knots to 0 in tiny fraction of second. Wings strike terrain, tear free, tumble across Glacier. Engines separate, tumble independently. Tail breaks away. Fuel tanks rupture but don't ignite. Altitude is too high for fire. Air too thin. Impact too sudden. Debris scatters across Glacier. Everything comes to rest within seconds. Silence follows. Glacier beginning its work immediately. This is high altitude. Snow falls frequently. Within days, fresh snowfall covers wreckage. Within weeks, more snow accumulates. Within months, wreckage is deeply buried. Snow compresses into firn, then into ice. Glacier is flowing downhill constantly. Inches at first, then feet, then yards per year. Wreckage is carried along, frozen in place, locked in glacial ice, descending slowly toward lower elevations where someday, decades later, it will emerge. Investigators examining engine components, looking for signs of malfunction. Engines appear normal. No seized pistons, no broken crankshafts, no obvious failures. All 4 engines were running at impact. Aircraft was under power, flying normally, when collision occurred. This rules out engine failure theories. This rules out fuel exhaustion scenarios. Stardust was functioning properly when it hit mountain. Crash was navigational error, not mechanical failure. Picture specialists analyzing human remains recovered from Glacier. Medical examiners and forensic anthropologists work with utmost respect for deceased. Remains are fragmentary, impact was violent. Glacier movement has dispersed them, but enough survives for examination. Death was instantaneous for everyone aboard. No evidence of survival after crash. No evidence of fire injury. No evidence of prolonged suffering. Small mercy in terrible tragedy. Crew and passengers felt nothing. One instant they existed, next instant they didn't. No warning. No fear. No pain. Just sudden end. Personal effects examined by investigators. Wallets identify passengers. Wedding rings confirm identities. Clothing fragments reveal who sat where. Letters and documents show purposes of travel. Everything helps reconstruct who was aboard, where they came from, why they were flying that day. These were real people with real lives, businessmen traveling for commerce, diplomat returning from assignment, courier carrying documents, crew doing their jobs. Each had family, friends, plans for future, all ended together on Glacier high on Tupungato. Investigators calculating exactly what wind conditions would have caused the fatal navigation error. They determined that headwinds of 60 to 80 knots, sustained during mountain crossing, would have reduced ground speed sufficiently to put aircraft miles behind calculated position. Such winds were meteorologically probable on August 2, 1947. Weather records show strong westerly flow at altitude. Mountain wave effects would have intensified winds. Jet stream, though less understood in 1947 than later, would have created additional headwind component. Imagine crew had no way to know their true ground speed. In 1947, aircraft navigation relied on dead reckoning, heading, airspeed, time. Pilots calculated position by plotting course on map, measuring distance traveled based on airspeed and elapsed time. This worked well in normal conditions, but it failed catastrophically in severe headwinds because crew had no independent verification of ground speed. They couldn't see ground through clouds. They had no GPS. They had no radar altimeter showing terrain clearance. They relied entirely on calculations that were wrong because assumptions about wind were wrong. Modern equivalent scenario to understand how this could happen. Imagine driving car at 60 miles per hour on highway, but unknown to you, entire highway is moving backward at 40 miles per hour. Your speedometer says 60. You feel like you're going 60, but you're only covering 20 miles per hour relative to ground. You believe you've traveled 60 miles in 1 hour. You've actually traveled 20. If you're navigating by dead reckoning alone, you'll make 60-mile error over 1 hour. Scale this up to aircraft traveling 200 miles across mountains, and error becomes catastrophic. Investigators writing final report on Stardust crash. Conclusion: controlled flight into terrain caused by navigation error resulting from undetected severe headwinds. Crew calculated position incorrectly, initiated descent prematurely, struck Tupungato's upper slopes while believing they had cleared mountain. Impact was at high speed, without warning, fatal to all aboard. Aircraft was functioning normally. Crew was experienced and qualified. Weather was challenging but not illegal for flight. Tragedy resulted from miscalculation, not negligence, not recklessness, not mechanical failure. Just tragic miscalculation amplified by extreme winds. Picture crash site itself, as investigators visited it after wreckage location was determined. High on Tupungato at 17,000 feet, in remote area rarely visited even by experienced mountaineers. Rock and ice predominate. Weather is severe. In 1947, this would have been utterly inaccessible for search teams. Even in 1998, reaching site required serious mountaineering expedition. No wonder wreckage went undiscovered for 50 years. No wonder searches in 1947 found nothing. Stardust hit one of most remote locations in entire Andes range, struck glacier that buried evidence completely, remained hidden until ice movements slowly revealed it. families receiving detailed explanations of what happened. Some find comfort in knowing. Father died instantly, felt nothing. Mother's last moments were ordinary, believing everything was normal, unaware of approaching mountain. Closure comes from understanding, even though understanding changes nothing about loss. Others find renewed grief in details. Knowing exactly how loved one died somehow makes loss more real. 50 years have passed, grief has mellowed, and now full knowledge brings fresh pain. What wreckage revealed and what it didn't reveal. Crash location. Solved. Cause of crash. Solved. Fate of passengers and crew. Solved. Time of impact. Approximately known. Impact conditions. Reconstructed. But STENDEC remains mysterious. Wreckage offered no clues about cryptic final message. Radio equipment was too damaged to examine. No logbook or notes survived that might explain what Dennis Harmer intended to transmit. Physical evidence solved physical mystery of crash, but left linguistic mystery unsolved. Stardust was found, but STENDEC was still lost. The wreckage investigation demonstrated power of modern forensic methods applied to old mystery. Even after 50 years, even after glacial burial and movement, even with fragmentary remains and scattered debris, investigators reconstructed what happened with high confidence. They couldn't read minds of dead crew, couldn't know exact thoughts in final minutes, couldn't recover lost radio messages or damaged instruments, but they could analyze metal, calculate trajectories, determine forces, reconstruct flight path. They could solve mystery that had endured for 5 decades. They could answer questions that had haunted families and puzzled investigators. They could bring closure, partial closure, incomplete closure, but closure nonetheless, to one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. Imagine forensic metallurgists examining fracture surfaces under electron microscopy. At microscopic level, metal grain structure reveals enormous detail about forces experienced during fracture. They could see whether metal tore slowly or fast, hot or cold, with warning or without. Every fracture on Stardust wreckage showed same characteristics: cold, fast, sudden. Metal grains were torn apart violently, fractured in milliseconds, deformed by impact forces exceeding anything aircraft was designed to withstand. This was high-energy impact, not gradual structural failure, not fatigue, not corrosion, not sabotage, just sudden collision with immovable mountain. Reconstruction specialists using computer modeling to simulate crash sequence. They input known variables: aircraft speed, mass, structural characteristics, terrain hardness, impact angle. Computer calculated deceleration forces, stress distributions, failure sequence. Model predicted nose crushing first, cockpit disintegrating, wings separating, fuselage breaking into sections, tail detaching. Model matched physical evidence perfectly. Every piece of wreckage fit predicted pattern. Simulation confirmed what forensics suggested. Stardust flew into mountain at cruise speed, struck nose first or slightly nose down, disintegrated in fraction of second, examining specific components for clues about final moments. Flight controls showed no evidence of extreme inputs, no bent control columns indicating pilot fought to avoid mountain. Throttle settings appeared normal for cruise flight. Landing gear was retracted. Flaps were up. Everything indicated routine cruising flight configuration. Crew wasn't trying to land, wasn't fighting emergency, wasn't aware of imminent disaster. They were flying normally when mountain appeared or didn't appear, hidden by clouds until too late to react. Picture analysis of radio equipment fragments. Investigators hoped these pieces might reveal something about STENDEC transmission. Was there evidence of malfunction, equipment damage from turbulence, anything unusual that might explain cryptic message? But radio equipment was too fragmented, too damaged by impact and 50 years of glacial transport. Tubes were shattered, wiring was corroded, Components were separated and lost. Nothing could be determined about equipment's operational state at moment of final transmission. STENDEC remained unexplained by physical evidence. Comparing stardust wreckage pattern to other known controlled flight into terrain accidents. Aviation investigators had decades of experience with CFIT crashes. They recognized patterns. Stardust fit pattern perfectly. Straight and level flight into terrain, high-speed impact, complete destruction, wide debris scatter, no evidence of evasive action. This was textbook CFIT caused by navigation error. If investigators had found this wreckage in 1947, cause would have been obvious immediately. 50-year delay didn't change fundamental nature of accident. Evidence told same story it would have told in 1947. Forensic examination of cockpit area fragments. This is where pilots died, where navigation decisions were made, where final moments played out. Crushed instruments, shattered windscreen, torn seats, control column fragments. Everything spoke of instantaneous violence. Investigators carefully documented every piece, looking for anything unusual. They found nothing suspicious. No evidence of fire before impact. No evidence of structural failure. No evidence of sabotage. Just evidence of extreme deceleration as aircraft went from 180 knots to zero in distance of perhaps 30 feet. Imagine analysis of clothing and personal effects for information about cabin conditions. Were passengers wearing oxygen masks? Were they bundled against cold? Were they buckled in seats? Fragmentary clothing suggested normal conditions. No evidence of oxygen use. No evidence of panic. Seat belt fragments indicated some passengers were secured. Everything suggested routine flight. Passengers weren't alarmed. Crew hadn't announced emergency. Final moments were ordinary from passenger perspective. They simply ceased to exist without warning or awareness. Meteorological post-analysis, using 1,998 understanding of mountain weather applied to 1,947 conditions. Meteorologists reconstructed probable wind conditions for August 2, 1,947. They used historical weather data, seasonal patterns, topographic effects. They calculated that strong westerly winds were virtually certain at altitude over Andes that day. Winds of 60 to 80 knots were probable. Jet stream effects were likely. Mountain wave amplification was expected. All meteorological analysis supported severe headwind theory. Stardust was almost certainly experiencing wind conditions that would create catastrophic navigation error, calculating specific position error that would result from severe headwinds. If Stardust was making 180 knots airspeed but experiencing 70-knot headwind, ground speed was only 110 knots. Over 45-minute mountain crossing, this would create position error of approximately 50 miles. Crew would calculate they were 50 miles farther west than actual position. When they initiated descent thinking they had cleared Tupungato, they were actually still approaching it. Error was large enough to be fatal, and it was undetectable with navigation technology available in 1947. Picture the specific impact mechanics revealed by wreckage distribution. Nose struck first, creating center of debris field. Cockpit and forward fuselage disintegrated here. Wings struck slightly later as aircraft rotated forward, separating and tumbling across Glacier. Engines, being heavy, maintained momentum and scattered farther. Tail section, weakest structural connection, separated and landed separately. Pattern was consistent with forward impact, slight nose-down attitude, wings level orientation. Aircraft wasn't banking or turning when it struck. It was flying straight into mountain, crew believing terrain was below rather than ahead. Technical report's final verdict on crash cause. After comprehensive analysis, investigators concluded controlled flight into terrain resulting from navigation error caused by severe undetected headwinds. Crew calculated position using dead reckoning based on airspeed and elapsed time. Actual ground speed was significantly reduced by extreme headwinds. Calculated position was in error by approximately 50 miles. Crew initiated descent believing they had cleared high terrain. Aircraft struck Tupungato's eastern slope at approximately 17,000 feet elevation. Impact was at high speed. Death was instantaneous for all aboard. No contributing mechanical factors identified. No evidence of pilot incapacity or impairment. Verdict was definitive. Mystery of crash location was solved. Cause was established. Only STENDEC remained mysterious. Even after wreckage was found, even after crash was explained, even after 50 years of mystery was solved, STENDEC remained enigmatic. That 5-letter sequence, transmitted twice in Morse code by experienced radio operator, moments before impact, continued to defy explanation. Investigators examined every possibility. Linguists analyzed it from every angle. Codebreakers attempted decryption. Amateur enthusiasts proposed countless theories, yet none achieved consensus. STENDEC resists solution even now, decades after wreckage discovery, testament to how completely simple message can become incomprehensible when context is lost. The various theories that emerged over decades, each attempting to make sense of 5 letters, STENDEC. Some theories proposed message was intentional, correctly transmitted exactly as operator intended. Other theories suggested error misheard message, corrupted transmission, operator mistake. Still others imagined STENDEC was partial message, fragment of longer communication interrupted by crash. Each theory had advocates, each had weaknesses. None achieved universal acceptance. Imagine first category. Theories proposing STENDEC was acronym. Military and aviation operations commonly used acronyms in 1,940 seconds. Could STENDEC stand for something? Most popular acronym theory suggested severe turbulence encountered, now descending, emergency crash landing. Imagine radio operator Dennis Harmer in cockpit experiencing violent turbulence, trying to send quick emergency message, using acronym to save time. Message makes perfect sense as description of disaster in progress. Each letter represents word describing situation, this scenario unfolding. Aircraft encounters severe mountain wave turbulence. Crew is thrown about. Harmer grabs microphone, needs to send emergency message quickly. He creates impromptu acronym combining situation description with status update. STENDEC severe turbulence encountered, now descending, emergency crash. He transmits it twice to ensure reception. Then, before he can elaborate, aircraft impacts mountain. Message makes sense as emergency communication. Problem: no evidence such acronym existed in standard radio procedure. No other examples found of operators using this acronym. Seems too elaborate for emergency situation when standard codes like SOS or Mayday existed. Alternative acronym theories. Some suggested Stardust, ETA Andes crash. Others proposed Santiago to London descent emergency. Still others imagined variations incorporating crew names, aircraft identification, location references. Each acronym attempt suffered same problem. No documentation that such codes were standard. No evidence operator would invent ad hoc acronym rather than using established procedures. No explanation why he'd transmit twice if urgency demanded brevity. Picture second category. Theories proposing STENDEC resulted from transmission or reception error. Morse code consists of dots and dashes representing letters. Atmospheric conditions, equipment problems, operator mistakes, all could corrupt message. Perhaps Harmer intended to send different message, but something went wrong in transmission. Perhaps ground station misheard message, recorded wrong letters. Perhaps atmospheric interference garbled signal. STENDEC might be corrupted version of intended message. Examining this possibility systematically, what messages could STENDEC be corrupted version of? Descent is obvious candidate, only one letter different, similar enough to suggest transmission error. Perhaps Harmer intended to send descent as position report, indicating aircraft was descending towards Santiago. Transmission error changed one letter. N became E. Then, when ground station queried unclear message, Harmer repeated it, but repeated corrupted version because he didn't realize transcription error had occurred. How Morse code error could happen. In Morse, N is dash dot, E is single dot. Fading signal or interference could make dash appear shorter, converting N into E. Descent becomes STENDEC. Ground station receives garbled message, requests repetition, receives same garbled message again because same atmospheric conditions still corrupt signal. Operator on both ends doesn't realize transcription is wrong. Message is faithfully transmitted and faithfully received, but wrong letter is what comes through. Imagine specialists analyzing other possible transmission errors. Could STENDEC be Stardust with transmission problems? Stardust was aircraft's name and call sign. Perhaps Harmer was sending aircraft identification, but letters were corrupted. A became E, U became N. Final letters dropped or misheard. Stardust STENDEC requires multiple errors, seems less likely than single letter corruption, but remains possible. Third category. Theories suggesting STENDEC was partial message, incomplete transmission. Perhaps Harmer was sending longer message, STENDEC, followed by more text, but crash interrupted transmission before completion. Perhaps ground station only recorded first word of multi-word message. Perhaps STENDEC was beginning of sentence. STENDEC could be place name, person's name, code word, with explanatory text following that was never sent or never received. Checking maps and records for places called STENDEC. Researchers searched Argentine and Chilean maps. No location named STENDEC existed. They searched passenger and crew lists. No one named STENDEC. They checked code books from period. No standard aviation or meteorological code called STENDEC. If message was partial, if STENDEC was proper noun, it remains unidentified despite extensive searching. Picture fourth category. Theories proposing STENDEC was operator error, inadvertent transmission of wrong message. Perhaps Harmer was distracted, confused, or mistaken. Perhaps he thought he was sending different message, but actually sent STENDEC. Perhaps he had written STENDEC on notepad for different purpose, then accidentally transmitted it instead of intended message. Perhaps cockpit was chaotic with navigation problems or weather, and he made transmission error under stress. Scenario where operator error occurred. Harmer was experienced, but even experts make mistakes. Perhaps he was preparing two different messages position report for Santiago and technical message for company operations and confused them, sending garbled combination. Perhaps he was copying down message from captain, misunderstood what was said, transmitted his misunderstanding. Perhaps he was startled by turbulence or distraction, hit wrong keys, sent unintended letters. Most intriguing operator error theory. Harmer hit wrong keys on his radio equipment. Some researchers noted that on certain radio keyboards used in 1947, keys for STENDEC letters were adjacent to keys for descent. If operator reached for descent but his hand was slightly misaligned, he might strike STENDEC instead. Like typing error on typewriter intending one word, producing another because fingers hit wrong keys. This theory assumes mechanical keyboard for encoding Morse, not manual key, which some aircraft of era did have. Imagine fifth category. Theories suggesting STENDEC was in different language. Perhaps Harmer was communicating in language other than English. Perhaps STENDEC was Spanish word, German word, indigenous language word. Researchers examined possibilities. In Spanish, no word STENDEC exists. In German, no relevant word. In indigenous languages of Andes region, no match. If STENDEC was foreign language, It's unrecognizable even to native speakers and linguists who have analyzed it. Sixth category: wild theories that emerged from desperation to explain inexplicable. Some suggested STENDEC was encrypted message, deliberately coded by operator for reasons unknown. Others proposed it was personal message to family, last words encoded so only intended recipient would understand. Still others imagined STENDEC was meaningless, sent by operator who knew death was imminent and wanted to leave final mystery as his legacy. Each wild theory required assumptions unsupported by evidence. Code breakers attempting to decrypt STENDEC as cipher. They tried substitution codes, transposition codes, numerical codes. They attempted Caesar shifts, Vigenère variations, book codes. They assumed every possible key length and method. Nothing produced intelligible result. If STENDEC was encrypted, key is lost forever. If it was not encrypted, no decryption can explain it. Either way, code breaking failed to solve mystery. Picture seventh category: theories suggesting STENDEC was correctly sent but misunderstood by modern analysis because context is lost. Perhaps in 1947, STENDEC meant something obvious to radio operators, but meaning has been forgotten. Perhaps it was slang, jargon, informal code used by operators but never documented in official procedures. Perhaps it was specific to that airline, that crew, that route. Perhaps someone in 1947 would have understood instantly, but 70 years later, context is gone and message is opaque. Linguistic anthropologists studying STENDEC as window into communication failure. They noted how message has all superficial characteristics of communication, letters, transmission, reception, but lacks essential characteristic, meaning. This makes STENDEC example of what linguists call pseudo-communication, something that looks like communication but doesn't actually communicate. It's form without content, signifier without signified, symbol without referent. From linguistic perspective, STENDEC is fascinating precisely because it fails as communication while succeeding as transmission. Cryptographic analysts in various intelligence agencies examining STENDEC as potential code. During Cold War especially, any mysterious message attracted attention from code breakers. NSA, GCHQ, other agencies likely analyzed STENDEC using most sophisticated methods available. No results were ever publicly acknowledged, but absence of solution suggests STENDEC wasn't encrypted with recognizable method. If it was code, it was either extremely sophisticated or based on one-time pad that can never be broken without key. More likely, it wasn't code at all, was error, accident, or message whose context is lost. Imagine amateur code enthusiasts developing increasingly baroque theories about STENDEC. Online forums devoted entire threads to analysis. Someone proposed STENDEC was Bible code requiring specific key. Another suggested it was musical notation representing sequence of notes. Third theorist claimed STENDEC was coordinates encoded using alphanumeric substitution. Each theory required elaborate explanation and produced results that convinced only their inventors. But enthusiasm for solving STENDEC never waned. Every generation of puzzle solvers took fresh approach, certain they had insight others missed. Professional linguists analyzing STENDEC for phonetic patterns. They noted that STENDEC follows English phonological rules. It's pronounceable. It sounds like it could be English word, even though it isn't. This suggested operator might have been English speaker, inventing or misremembering word. Compare to random letter sequence like XQFBZW, which violates phonological patterns. STENDEC feels word-like, even though it's meaningless. This quality makes it particularly frustrating. It seems like it should be recognizable but isn't. Comparing STENDEC to other aviation mysteries involving unexplained communications. Flight 19's final transmission. We can't find west. Everything looks strange, even the ocean. Garbled but comprehensible crew was lost and disoriented. Helios Airways 522's final transmission. The captain's seat is not occupied. Cryptic, but ultimately explained pilot was incapacitated. Malaysia 370's final transmission. Good night, Malaysian 370. Routine but haunting, given what followed. STENDEC is unique among aviation final messages because it's purely cryptic. No context clues, no obvious meaning, no subsequent explanation. Picture the psychology of pattern seeking applied to STENDEC. Humans are extraordinary at finding patterns, even in random data. We see faces in clouds, animals in constellations, messages in noise. This ability usually serves us well, but can mislead when applied to truly random sequences. STENDEC might be random error that looks meaningful because we're predisposed to find meaning. Like ink blots that appear to depict specific objects, STENDEC appears to mean something because our brains insist on finding significance even where none exists. How STENDEC would be analysed if it appeared today instead of 1947. Modern tools would include voice stress analysis, if audio recording existed, computational linguistic analysis using massive databases, machine learning algorithms trained to detect patterns, crowdsourcing via internet to examine millions of possibilities. But without recording of actual transmission, without context, without living witnesses, even modern tools would likely fail. STENDEC's resistance to explanation isn't due to inadequate analytical tools, but to fundamental absence of information needed to interpret it. The specific moment Dennis Harmer encoded STENDEC in Morse code. His hand on telegraph key sending pattern ..s-t.e-.e-d.c. Each letter deliberately formed, transmitted twice for clarity. In that moment, message had meaning to him, perhaps obvious meaning, perhaps message that made perfect sense. In context he understood, but context died with him. Transmission survived, but meaning didn't. We have shadow of communication without substance. We have letters without message. Imagine if other evidence had survived alongside STENDEC. Suppose cockpit voice recorder had existed, we'd hear final conversation, understand context, solve mystery immediately. Suppose flight log had been recovered intact, we'd see what Harmer wrote, understand what he meant. Suppose other aircraft had been nearby and heard transmission, we'd have independent confirmation or clarification. But none of these existed or survived. STENDEC stands alone, unsupported by corroborating evidence, unexplained by context, resistant to analysis, precisely because it's isolated datum. The philosophical question STENDEC raises about meaning and interpretation. Does message have inherent meaning, or does meaning exist only in relationship between sender and receiver? If sender intended specific meaning but receiver doesn't understand, does meaning exist? STENDEC suggests meaning requires shared context. Without context, symbols are just symbols, marks without significance, sounds without sense, letters without words. This is profound insight disguised as aviation mystery. STENDEC teaches that communication isn't just transmission but requires understanding, and understanding requires shared framework that can be lost. Researchers interviewing surviving radio operators from 1947 era, asking if STENDEC was familiar. None recognized it, none had heard it before, none could explain what it might mean. If STENDEC was jargon or informal code, it was so obscure that even practitioners of the art don't remember it. More likely, it was not standard usage at all, but something unique to that moment, that transmission, that operator. Picture 8th category, theories based on phonetic similarity. Perhaps ground station operator misheard spoken message, wrote down STENDEC, then asked for repetition, and operator repeated what ground station had written rather than what was originally said. This requires series of misunderstandings. Original message spoken, ground station mishears it as STENDEC. Operator confirms STENDEC because that's what was asked about. Even though original message was different, message chain breaking down this way. Harmer says something over radio. Ground station operator hears STENDEC due to static or accent or misunderstanding. Ground operator writes, STENDEC in log, sends query. Did you say STENDEC? Harmer, confused by question, replies, yes, STENDEC, not realizing ground station has misheard original message. Now STENDEC is confirmed twice, recorded twice, but was never what Harmer intended to communicate in first place. Theory requires communication failure so complete that neither party realizes they're not understanding each other. Ninth category. Theories suggesting STENDEC was corrupted version of Spanish phrase. Santiago controllers spoke Spanish. Perhaps Harmer attempted Spanish phrase, made errors in spelling or pronunciation, produced STENDEC as his attempt. Researchers examined Spanish possibilities. STENDEC, it's something. STENDEC. No Spanish word. Descend, desciend, in Spanish, not similar to STENDEC. Spanish language theories fail to produce convincing explanation. Imagine 10th category. Theories that STENDEC was anagram. Letters rearranged from original message. Perhaps Harmer wrote message down, then accidentally transmitted it with letters mixed up. Perhaps transmission process somehow scrambled letters. Researchers tried every anagram of STENDEC. Descent appears with one extra E. Detected appears with missing D and extra C. No perfect anagram produces sensible message. Letter scrambling theories fail unless you allow significant stretching of possibilities. Expert conclusions after decades of analysis. No single theory achieves consensus. Most likely explanations involve transmission error, descent corrupted to STENDEC, or operator error, wrong message sent inadvertently. But even these require assumptions about what happened in cockpit and in transmission that cannot be verified. Radio equipment wreckage was too damaged to examine for clues. No transcript of actual Morse code transmission survives, only ground station's written record of STENDEC. Without recording of actual sounds, without equipment to examine, without operator to interview, definitive explanation is impossible, accepting that some mysteries remain unsolvable. STENDEC is likely one of them. Even after aircraft was found, even after crash was explained, even after extensive linguistic analysis, those 5 letters resist interpretation. They remain enigmatic, not because they encode profound secret, but because context necessary to understand them is lost forever. Perhaps explanation was simple and obvious in moment of transmission. Perhaps it was trivial error that would have been clarified if crash had not occurred seconds later. Perhaps it was nothing, random noise, meaningless mistake, accident of circumstance. Picture the irony. Solving the crash mystery didn't solve the STENDEC mystery because they were separate mysteries all along. Finding wreckage explained what happened to aircraft and why navigation error, severe headwinds, controlled flight into terrain. But wreckage couldn't explain what radio operator intended to communicate moments before impact. That knowledge died with him. Radio message and aircraft accident were temporally connected. One occurred just before other, but not necessarily causally connected. STENDEC might have had nothing to do with crash. It might have been routine message, unrelated to disaster that followed seconds later. How frustrating this is for those seeking closure. Crash is solved, but message is not. Aircraft is found, but meaning is lost. Questions are answered, but one question, what did STENDEC mean, remains open. It's like solving murder mystery and identifying murderer but never learning motive. Practical question is answered. Philosophical question endures. Justice is served, but understanding is incomplete. STENDEC, joining other famous unsolved linguistic mysteries. Voynich manuscript book, written in unknown script, possibly meaningful or possibly hoax. Zodiac killer ciphers, some solved, some still mysterious. Tamam Shud, case unknown man found dead with torn book page reading Tamam Shud, identity and purpose unknown. STENDEC belongs in this company. brief, cryptic, resistant to analysis, probably simple in origin, but appearing profound in mystery. The various STENDEC theories demonstrate human need to find meaning, even where meaning may not exist. We resist accepting that message could be meaningless. We construct elaborate explanations for 5 random letters. We prefer conspiracy to coincidence, code to error, significance to accident. STENDEC might be nothing more than transmission error, keyboard mistake, or mishearing, but we make it into mystery because mysteries are more satisfying than mundane explanations. We make it into puzzle because we want to solve it, want to know, want to understand, even when understanding is impossible. The Stardust mystery endures not despite being partially solved, but because of it. Finding wreckage answered practical questions where aircraft crashed, why it crashed, what happened to passengers and crew, but wreckage couldn't answer philosophical question. What did STENDEC mean? This combination of solved and unsolved creates particularly compelling narrative. We know everything except the one thing we most want to know. We have closure without complete understanding. We have answers without final answer. Picture human psychology surrounding unsolved mysteries. We are pattern-seeking creatures. We see faces in clouds, hear words in random noise, find significance in coincidence. When presented with genuine mystery, something that resists explanation despite analysis, our minds engage intensely. We cannot resist trying to solve it. Unsolved mystery occupies mental space, demands attention, frustrates and fascinates simultaneously. STENDEC exemplifies this perfectly. 5 letters that might mean everything or might mean nothing. Why certain mysteries capture public imagination while others fade. Stardust has several elements that make mystery memorable. First, cryptic final message, STENDEC, that sounds like it should mean something. Second, complete disappearance for 50 years, vanishing so thoroughly that searches found nothing. Third, dramatic setting, high Andes, mountains, glaciers, extreme conditions. Fourth, preservation by ice-time capsule effect that froze tragedy for 5 decades before revealing it. Fifth, dual mystery crash location and message, meaning with one solved and one not. How STENDEC functions psychologically. It looks like word, 5 letters, pronounceable, seems like it should be Spanish or English or some language. Our brains try to make it mean something. We compare it to words we know. We search for anagrams, acronyms, codes. We cannot accept that it might be error, accident, meaningless. If we accept meaninglessness, we lose hope of solution. Mystery becomes unsolvable not because answer is hidden, but because there is no answer. This is psychologically unsatisfying. We prefer difficult puzzle to absence of puzzle. Imagine Glacier as metaphor for mystery itself. Glacier preserved stardust for 50 years, kept it frozen, hidden, mysterious. Glacier moved inexorably, carrying wreckage slowly toward revelation. Glacier finally released secret, but only partially physical wreckage emerged, but meaning remained frozen. Mystery is like this. Some aspects can be excavated and examined, others remain buried beneath ice of lost context and vanished witnesses. We recover what we can, but some things stay frozen forever. Glacier as time machine, as archive, as preserver of moments. Everything that falls onto Glacier's surface becomes frozen in time. Ancient ice contains air bubbles from millennia past. Glaciers in Alps occasionally release climbers who fell into crevasses decades earlier, preserved perfectly, unaged, still wearing clothes from their era. Glacier is capsule that moves through time differently than we do. For Stardust, 50 years passed while wreckage was buried. World changed completely. Aircraft design evolved, navigation technology transformed, Cold War came and went, digital age began, but wreckage remained 1,947, frozen in moment of crash. Philosophical dimension of this preservation. Stardust passengers and crew died in 1947. Their remains were frozen immediately. When discovered in 1998, they were still essentially from 1947, preserved by cold, aged by ice, but recognizable as humans from different era. Letters in pockets were still legible, photographs still showed faces, watches still showed time of impact. Everything was simultaneously 50 years old and preserved as if crash happened yesterday. Glacier made time strange, collapsed 5 decades into eternal present of ice. Picture why humans are fascinated by cryptic final messages. Last words carry weight of finality. When someone speaks knowing death is imminent, their words seem profound even if content is mundane. STENDEC transmitted moments before crash becomes charged with significance because we know what followed. Radio operator Dennis Harmer sent this message, then died. Were these truly final words? Did he know disaster was imminent? Did message relate to crash? We want answers because finality makes everything meaningful. Comparing STENDEC to other famous last words. Et tu, brute? Julius Caesar's alleged last words, questioning betrayal. Go on, get out. Last words are for fools who haven't said enough. Karl Marx, reportedly. I'm going away tonight, James Dean, eerily prophetic before fatal crash. Each becomes memorable because death followed. Context makes words significant, but most last words are mundane. I love you. Goodbye. See you tomorrow. STENDEC is unusual because it's cryptic, resistant to interpretation, possibly unintentional as final message. Aviation mystery culture that developed around cases like Stardust. Amelia Earhart's disappearance inspired decades of searching, theories, books, expeditions. Flight 19, 5 torpedo bombers that vanished over Bermuda Triangle in 1945, became legend despite probably prosaic explanation. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 disappeared in 2014, spawned countless theories despite modern tracking technology. Humans are fascinated by aircraft that vanish, by mysteries of sky, by technological failures that defeat sophisticated systems. Imagine why aviation mysteries particularly capture attention. Aircraft represent technology, control, safety. When aircraft vanishes completely, it challenges assumptions. We believe we can track anything, find anything, explain anything. Complete disappearance seems impossible in modern world. Even in 1947, aircraft disappearances were rare enough to be noteworthy. Technology was supposed to make flying safe. Radio was supposed to maintain communication. Navigation was supposed to prevent getting lost. When all systems fail simultaneously and aircraft vanishes, it creates cognitive dissonance that demands explanation. STENDEC in popular culture over decades. Books mentioned it. Television documentaries featured it. Radio programs discussed it. Internet forums debated it endlessly. Message appeared in articles about unsolved mysteries, lists of strange disappearances, collections of inexplicable codes. STENDEC became cultural reference point, mentioned alongside more famous mysteries. It appeared in fiction novels, short stories, plays as inspiration for plots involving cryptic messages and vanished aircraft. How STENDEC functions as symbol. 5 letters represent larger themes: communication failure, lost context, inadequacy of language, limits of knowledge. When we cannot decipher message, we confront epistemological limits. Not everything can be known. Not every question has answer. Some mysteries remain mysteries forever, not because answer is difficult, but because answer is lost irretrievably. STENDEC reminds us that human knowledge is incomplete and always will be. Picture why partial solutions leave us unsatisfied. If Stardust had never been found, mystery would be complete and somehow more acceptable. Everything would be unknown. But finding wreckage created asymmetry. We know what happened to aircraft, but not what message meant. This is frustrating in a way that total mystery is not. It's like solving jigsaw puzzle, except for one piece. Image is almost complete. Context is clear, but that one missing piece draws all attention. STENDEC is missing piece that prevents complete picture. Comparing Stardust to genuinely unsolved mysteries where nothing is known. Roanoke Colony entire settlement vanished in 1,580 seconds. No trace ever found. Mary Celeste's ship found abandoned at sea in 1872. Crew never seen again. Circumstances unknown. These are complete mysteries. What happened, where people went, why they left, everything is unknown. They're mysterious but somehow less frustrating than Stardust because there's nothing to work with. Stardust gives us everything except one detail, and that detail becomes obsession. Why human mind resists accepting that STENDEC might have been meaningless error. We prefer significance to randomness. We prefer conspiracy to cock-up. We prefer elaborate explanation to simple mistake. Idea that experienced radio operator accidentally sent wrong message, or that transmission was corrupted by atmospheric interference, or that letters were misheard. These explanations seem too mundane for mystery that has endured so long. We want STENDEC to be profound because we've invested 50 years of speculation in it. Imagine if STENDEC were definitely proven to be transmission error, corrupted version of descent. Mystery would be solved, books would close, documentaries would end, discussion would cease. But this would be disappointing to many. Solving mystery robs it of mystique. Explanation makes it ordinary. Sometimes we prefer mystery to solution, especially when solution is prosaic. We enjoy not knowing more than we would enjoy knowing something boring. STENDEC as eternal mystery is more interesting than STENDEC as typo. Role of STENDEC in demonstrating fragility of communication. Human communication relies on shared context, common language, mutual understanding. Remove any of these and communication becomes impossible. STENDEC represents communication that lost its context. Whatever Dennis Harmer meant to convey, context died with him. No dictionary can restore it, no analysis can recreate it. Communication without context is noise. And that's what STENDEC became, 5 letters of noise that once meant something to someone. How different this would be if Harmer had survived, if aircraft had landed safely, if STENDEC had been explained next day. Oh, that was operator error. I meant to send descent but hit wrong keys. Or, that was corrupted by static. Original message was Stardust. Or, that was private joke with ground operator. We had running gag about made-up words. Any casual explanation would have satisfied, but crash made casual explanation impossible. Mystery was born not from profound code, but from timing message sent moments before death, meaning never clarified. Picture Stardust mystery as lesson in what can and cannot be known. We can know physical facts. Aircraft crashed at specific location. Impact occurred at specific time. Forensic evidence reveals specific sequence of events. We can know mechanical facts. Navigation error caused by severe headwinds. Descent initiated prematurely. Collision with terrain at high speed. But we cannot know thoughts in operator's mind. Intentions behind final message. Meaning of 5 letters. Physical world preserves physical evidence. Mental world preserves nothing. Glacier can release aluminum fragments, but not human intentions. The future of STENDEC mystery. Will it ever be conclusively solved? Probably not. All principles are dead. No recordings exist. Equipment is destroyed. Context is lost. Best we can do is propose plausible explanations, and several exist, none provable. Future researchers might develop new analytical techniques, might find overlooked documents, might interview descendants who remember family stories, but breakthrough seems unlikely. STENDEC will probably remain mysterious forever, not because it's profoundly cryptic, but because it's irretrievably contextless. How this makes Stardust's story satisfying in strange way. Complete solution would be definitive, but forgettable. Partial solution, crash explained, message mysterious is memorable. We remember asymmetry, frustration, incompleteness. Stardust is story we tell when discussing unsolved mysteries. Not because crash itself is mysterious, it isn't anymore, but because message remains so. Mystery endures precisely because everything else is solved. STENDEC stands alone, isolated mystery, all the more compelling because nothing else about Stardust is mysterious anymore. Imagine what draws you personally to this story. Perhaps it's the setting high Andes, remote glacier, extreme conditions. Perhaps it's the time capsule quality, 50 years frozen, then revealed. Perhaps it's the cryptic message 5 letters that tantalize interpretation. Perhaps it's the tragedy 11 lives ended suddenly, families waiting 50 years for answers. Perhaps it's the satisfaction of partial solution crash explained even if message isn't. Whatever draws you, Stardust has that quality of complete story that isn't quite complete, solved mystery that remains partly mysterious, answered question that leaves one question hanging. The mystery endures because it combines human elements we cannot resist: tragedy, disappearance, cryptic communication, extreme environment, long concealment, dramatic revelation, partial solution. It endures because Glacier preserved it physically and culturally. It endures because 5 letters STENDEC resist interpretation despite decades of analysis. It endures because we are human and cannot help seeking meaning, pattern, significance in things that might be random. Mystery endures because that's what mysteries do when answers remain just beyond reach. How Stardust story functions as modern myth. Ancient myths explained mysteries with gods and monsters. Modern myths use technology and nature but serve same psychological function, making sense of incomprehensible, providing narrative structure for chaos. Stardust has elements of classic myth: journey into dangerous realm, mountains, test of skills, navigation, cryptic message, like oracle's prophecy, tragic end, long concealment, eventual revelation. Story resonates because it touches archetypal patterns embedded in human consciousness. How different generations interpret Stardust differently. Generation that lived through 1947 saw tragedy firsthand, remembered when it was current news, connected it to post-war aviation expansion. Baby boomers discovered it as historical mystery, fascinating puzzle from parents' era. Generation X encountered it through books and early internet discussions. Millennials know it primarily through digital archives and YouTube documentaries. Each generation brings different perspective, different questions, different interpretations. But STENDEC fascinates all generations. Equally, mystery transcends generational boundaries. Imagine psychological comfort some find in unsolvable mysteries. World often feels chaotic, meaningless, random. Mysteries provide structure to chaos. They're puzzles with answers, questions that could be resolved, problems that invite solutions. Even unsolved mystery is better than random chaos because it implies there is answer somewhere, somehow. STENDEC might be meaningless, but treating it as mystery gives it significance. We prefer significant mysteries to insignificant accidents. This is human nature imposing meaning on meaningless. How Stardust influenced subsequent aviation investigations. Lesson learned was importance of confirming position using multiple methods, not relying solely on dead reckoning. After Stardust and similar accidents, procedures improved. Mandatory position reports at known landmarks, radar coverage extended, radio navigation aids installed. Eventually, GPS eliminated dead reckoning altogether. These improvements saved countless lives. Stardust's tragedy contributed to safer aviation, though this is cold comfort to families who lost loved ones. Benefits came too late for those who died, but helped those who flew later. If Stardust had been routine crash without cryptic message, would we remember it? Probably not. Controlled flight into terrain was common in 1,940 seconds. Many aircraft struck mountains in bad weather or due to navigation error. Most are forgotten except by specialists. What makes Stardust memorable is STENDEC, that inexplicable final message. Without STENDEC, Stardust would be footnote in aviation history. With STENDEC, it's legend. 5 letters make all difference between forgettable accident and enduring mystery. Picture how internet age transformed Stardust discussion. Pre-internet, mystery was known to aviation historians and enthusiasts who read specialized books. Internet democratized access. Anyone could learn about Stardust, propose theories, debate solutions. Forums dedicated thousands of posts to STENDEC analysis. Wikipedia articles compiled information. YouTube videos explained case to new audiences. Social media spread story virally. Mystery that was once obscure became widely known. Crowdsourced analysis generated more theories than professional investigators ever produced, though not more solutions. Comparing Stardust to other unsolved mysteries in non-aviation contexts. JFK assassination explanations exist, but conspiracy theories persist. Zodiac killer, some ciphers solved, some remain mysterious. Voynich manuscript book, that might be elaborate hoax or genuine unknown language. Common thread is partial information. We know some things but not others. This asymmetry between known and unknown drives endless speculation. If everything was unknown, we'd give up. If everything was known, we'd move on. But knowing most things except key detail creates irresistible intellectual frustration, the specific literary quality that makes Stardust compelling. Good stories have clear beginning, middle, end, with conflict and resolution. Stardust has perfect 3-act structure. Act 1 establishes normal flight. Act 2 introduces problem disappearance and STENDEC. Act 3 brings partial resolution, wreckage found, crash explained, but leaves tension, STENDEC unexplained. This structure is dramatically satisfying despite or because of incomplete resolution. Story ends with question mark, and question marks are more memorable than periods. Imagine how educators use Stardust case in teaching various subjects. Aviation instructors teach it as navigation safety case study. Communication professors use it to illustrate importance of clear messaging. Linguists discuss it in classes about language and meaning. Glaciologists cite it as example of ice preservation. Forensic scientists reference it in courses about cold case investigation. Mystery studies instructors include it in curriculum about unsolvable problems. Stardust becomes teaching tool precisely because it combines so many disciplines and raises so many interesting questions. Individuals who became Stardust experts, dedicating years to researching every detail. One British researcher compiled 1,000-page dossier, interviewed dozens of witnesses, filed Freedom of Information requests for government files. Argentine historian organized multiple expeditions to Tupungato, photographed crash site repeatedly over years. Canadian aviation writer published definitive book on case after decade of research. Each expert contributed pieces to puzzle, clarified details, eliminated false theories. Their collective work ensures Stardust is thoroughly documented, even if not completely explained. We've travelled from August 2, 1947 to present day, following story of Stardust, from departure to disappearance to discovery. The journey spans 50 years of mystery, decades of speculation, and final revelation that solved crash while leaving one question forever unanswered. This is story of aircraft and glacier, of technology and nature, of human error and natural preservation, of questions answered and questions that remain. Stardust at beginning. Avro Lancastrian GAGWH, 4-engine airliner, converted from wartime bomber to civilian transport. Robust aircraft, experienced crew, proven route. Everything suggested routine flight on August morning in 1947. Captain Reginald Cook commanded, with First Officer Norman Cook, Navigator Hilton Cook, Radio Officer Dennis Harmer, Flight Engineer Donald Checklin, 6 passengers aboard. businessman, diplomat, courier, others whose names became footnotes to mystery. 11 people expecting normal journey from Buenos Aires to Santiago, expecting safe arrival, expecting to continue their lives. None suspecting this flight would end on Glacier high in Andes. Imagine that morning departure from Mendoza, refueling stop en route across mountains. Aircraft climbed to altitude, headed west toward mountain range, entered clouds that obscured terrain. Crew followed established procedure. Dead reckoning navigation based on heading, airspeed, time. They calculated position, estimated arrival, followed plan that had worked countless times before. But this time, extraordinary winds altered calculation fatally. Headwinds of 60 or 80 knots reduced ground speed dramatically. Aircraft traveled much slower than crew believed. Position estimate became fatally wrong. Final minutes. Crew calculating they had cleared Tupungato, beginning descent towards Santiago, reporting position and estimated arrival time. Radio operator sending STENDEC, whatever it meant, whatever he intended, whatever message he tried to communicate. Then mountain appearing through cloud, or perhaps never appearing at all, just sudden impact at 180 knots. Aircraft striking Tupungato's upper slopes at 17,000 feet elevation. Instant disintegration. Everyone dead immediately. Wreckage scattering across Glacier. Silence. Frantic days that followed. Stardust overdue. No distress signal received except cryptic STENDEC that made no sense. Searches launched immediately. Aircraft flying over Andes, searching valleys and peaks. Nothing found. Weeks of searching. Nothing. Months. Nothing. Disappearance was complete. Stardust had vanished as thoroughly as aircraft could vanish, swallowed by mountains or sky or something unknown. Searches eventually ceased. Families mourned without bodies to bury, without wreckage to examine, without answers to questions that haunted them. Picture 50 years passing. Half-century of speculation, theory, mystery, UFO theories in flying saucer era of late 1940 seconds. Sabotage theories during Cold War paranoia. Pilot error theories from aviation experts. Weather theories from meteorologists. Linguistic theories about STENDEC from code breakers and language specialists. Each decade brought new explanations. None could be proven. Stardust remained in that category of unsolved mysteries, alongside Amelia Earhart and Flight 19, examples of aircraft that vanish completely, leaving nothing but questions. Glacier, during these 50 years, patient and inexorable, ice flowed slowly downhill, grinding forward, carrying stardust wreckage with it. Snow accumulated on top, compressed into more ice, buried debris deeper. Decades passed. World changed dramatically. Jet aircraft replaced propeller planes, radar became standard, GPS revolutionized navigation. But Glacier was unchanged, still flowing, still carrying wreckage, still keeping secret. Ice moved perhaps half-mile in 50 years, descended perhaps 1,000 feet in elevation, approached margin where melting occurs. January 1998. Two climbers noticing metal protruding from ice at 15,000 feet on Tupungato. Investigation revealing it was aircraft wreckage. Identification confirming stardust. Expedition excavating accessible pieces. 50-year mystery suddenly solved in terms of where aircraft was, what happened, why crash occurred. Forensic analysis reconstructing sequence, navigation error from severe headwinds, premature descent, high-speed impact with mountain, instant death for all aboard. Mystery solved except for STENDEC. Imagine dual nature of resolution. Crash explained but message mysterious. We know stardust flew into Tupungato because navigation was wrong. We know why navigation was wrong, undetected severe headwinds. We know crew died instantly on impact. We know Glacier preserved and moved wreckage for 50 years before revealing it. We know all the physical facts, all the mechanical explanations, all the forensic details. But we don't know what Dennis Harmer meant when he transmitted STENDEC. That 5-letter sequence remains enigmatic despite everything else being explained. What this means philosophically. Not everything can be known. Some questions lack answers, not because answers are hidden, but because they're lost. Context dies with people who had it. Intentions vanish when minds are gone. Physical evidence persists. Glacier preserved aluminum fragments, clothing, personal effects. But mental evidence is lost. Thoughts, intentions, meanings. We can reconstruct what happened, but not what was meant. Glacier is perfect metaphor. It preserves physical but not mental, material but not meaningful. Standing on Tupungato Glacier today, at approximate location where wreckage emerged. You can see high peaks surrounding you, glacial ice beneath your feet, immense scale of Andes stretching to horizon. 50 years ago, stardust struck somewhere above, higher on mountain. Glacier carried debris to this spot over decades. More wreckage remains buried upslope, will emerge gradually over coming years as ice continues flowing and melting. You're standing at intersection of tragedy and geology, human drama and natural process, brief human life and patient geological time. Picture the families today, descendants of those who died. Grandchildren who never met grandparents killed on stardust. Great-grandchildren who know story only through family history. They carry forward memory of people they never knew, victims of accident that happened before they were born. Loss ripples through generations. Each family gathering includes empty place for person who never returned from mountains. Each telling of family history includes chapter about stardust. Death ended 11 lives but affected hundreds of people across multiple generations. What Dennis Harmer would think if he could know STENDEC became famous. He transmitted 5 letters as routine radio message or error or something mundane. He couldn't have imagined those letters would puzzle people for decades, be analysed by thousands of researchers, appear in books and documentaries, become cultural reference point. If meaning was trivial, dissent, with typo, for example, he'd be bewildered that mistake became mystery. If meaning was significant only in lost context, he'd be frustrated that obvious to him message is incomprehensible to everyone else. Either way, he'd likely be amazed that transmission outlived him so dramatically. The specific moment on August 2, 1947, at 5:41 p.m. local time, when everything ended. 11 people stopped existing. Aircraft ceased to be aircraft and became debris. Journey ended in instant. Plans ended. Futures ended. At that precise moment, someone in Santiago was waiting for arrival. Someone in Buenos Aires was thinking about passenger aboard. Someone in Britain was expecting letter from crew member. All these expectations suddenly became impossible, though nobody knew yet. Death often happens this way. Life continues normally for observers while ending catastrophically for victims. We're all one moment away from transition from being to not being, and stardust reminds us of this uncomfortable truth. Imagine glaciers elsewhere that might hold similar secrets. Aircraft that vanished in Alaska, in Greenland, in Himalayas, in other glaciated mountains. Climbers who fell into crevasses and vanished. Equipment abandoned at high camps, all being carried slowly down slope by ice, preserved by cold, waiting for emergence. Glaciers are archives, storing history we didn't know we were recording. As climate warms and glaciers retreat, more secrets will emerge. Each will have story. Each will represent moment frozen in time. Stardust was one revelation. More will come. What remains truly mysterious after all analysis, after wreckage recovery, after forensic examination? Location, known. Cause, known. Mechanics of crash, known. Fate of people, known. Timing, known. Weather, reconstructed. Navigation error, explained. What's not known? Meaning of STENDEC. That's all. 5 letters resist explanation while everything else yields to analysis. This is strangely appropriate ending for story almost complete closure, but not quite. It's like solving nearly entire crossword puzzle except one clue, reading nearly entire book except one chapter, completing nearly entire journey except final step. Families finally receiving answers after 50 years. Some relatives were still alive in 1998, elderly siblings, adult children who had been young when parents died. They learned where aircraft crashed. They learned why it crashed. They learned loved ones died instantly without suffering. Remains were recovered, identified where possible, buried properly. Closure came, incomplete closure, imperfect closure, but closure. After 50 years of wondering and waiting, they knew. Knowledge changed nothing about loss but provided what memory could not. Confirmation, explanation, finality. Picture tribute to 11 lives lost. Captain Reginald Cook, experienced pilot doing his job. First Officer Norman Cook, navigating as trained. Navigator Hilton Cook, calculating position as procedures required. Radio Officer Dennis Harmer, sending messages including final cryptic STENDEC. Flight Engineer Donald Checklin, monitoring systems. And 6 passengers whose names deserve mention: Mr. Paul Simpson, Mr. Peter Young, Mr. Casey Size, Mr. Jack Gooderham, Mrs. Martha Limpert, and Mr. Peter Atala. 11 people, 11 lives, 11 futures ended together on Glacier High in Andes. They deserve to be remembered as individuals, not just statistics in aviation mystery. What we carry forward from this story: understanding that technology doesn't eliminate risk, navigation errors still occur despite sophisticated equipment. Recognition that nature is powerful, mountains and glaciers operate on timescales and power scales that dwarf human concerns. Appreciation that mysteries can be partially solved, physical questions answered, while philosophical questions remain. Acceptance that some things cannot be known, STENDEC might forever resist interpretation. And perhaps most importantly, respect for those who died and those who searched for answers. Stardust. In broader context of human exploration and tragedy, we push boundaries, we take risks, we travel through dangerous environments, we rely on technology, training, procedure. Usually it works, sometimes it fails. When failure is dramatic, complete disappearance, cryptic message, decades of mystery, we remember it. When Glacier finally reveals what happened, we learn from it. Every air safety improvement comes from analyzing crashes. Every navigation advancement comes from understanding errors. Stardust contributed to this progress, though payment was terrible. Imagine STENDEC's ultimate legacy, not as profound code or encrypted message, but as reminder of communication's fragility. 5 letters transmitted moments before death, received clearly, recorded faithfully, transmitted twice, yet meaning is lost because context died with sender. No amount of analysis can restore what only Dennis Harmer knew. STENDEC demonstrates limits of linguistic archaeology. Sometimes messages remain opaque forever, not because they're impossible to decode, but because key to decoding is gone. How Glacier continues its work even now. Stardust wreckage is not entirely recovered. Much remains buried in ice higher on mountain. Glacier continues flowing downhill, continues carrying debris, will continue revealing pieces over coming decades as ice melts in warming climate. Each summer, perhaps more fragments emerge. Each year, Glacier moves wreckage farther from original impact site. Eventually, all wreckage will emerge at Glacier's terminus, scattered across moraine, separated from ice that preserved it. Glacier will have completed its journey, delivered its burden, released its secret entirely. Looking back at this entire arc from 1947 departure to 1998 discovery to present-day understanding. Story began with routine flight, became mystery when aircraft vanished, remained mystery through 50 years of speculation, transformed into solved crash when Glacier revealed wreckage, yet retained mystery in form of unexplained final message. This is complete story, beginning, middle, end, and epilogue that refuses resolution. Perfect narrative, in strange way everything explained except one thing, and that one thing becomes most memorable part. Picture what draws people to this story even now, decades after wreckage discovery. Combination of elements: remote location, extreme conditions, time capsule preservation, cryptic message, partial solution. We're fascinated by ice preserving past. We're intrigued by messages that resist interpretation. We're drawn to mysteries that seem solvable but aren't. Stardust and STENDEC together create narrative that satisfies while remaining incomplete, answers questions while leaving one question unanswered, closes story while leaving door slightly ajar. Final reflection: mysteries endure not despite solutions but because of them. Total mystery is frustrating but somehow acceptable. We don't know anything, so we're not close to knowing. Partial mystery is compelling because we're so close we know everything except one detail, and that detail becomes obsession. Stardust is now partial mystery. Crash is explained. STENDEC is not. This asymmetry makes story memorable. We remember frustration more than satisfaction. We remember question mark more than period. The story of Stardust is story of many things: aviation safety, mountain weather, glacial geology, linguistic analysis, human psychology, but ultimately, it's story of 11 people who died suddenly on August Day in 1947, and of Glacier that preserved evidence of their fate for 50 years before finally releasing it. It's story of questions answered and question that remains. It's story of technology and nature, knowledge and mystery, certainty and doubt. It's story that ended in 1947 but continues in memory, in analysis, in wonder about those 5 letters, STENDEC, that resisted explanation then and resist explanation now. Thank you for traveling with me through this story of ice and mystery, of questions answered and questions that remain unanswered. We've stood together on high Glacier, where climbers made their discovery. We've listened to final radio transmission that puzzles us still. We've watched 50 years pass while ice slowly carried its secret toward revelation. We've learned that some mysteries solve themselves eventually, given patience and time, while other mysteries remain mysterious forever. Stardust reminds us that past is never truly lost. It's preserved somewhere, in ice or memory or records, waiting to emerge when conditions are right. And STENDEC reminds us that even when past emerges, we don't always understand what we find. Sometimes meaning is lost irretrievably. Sometimes questions lack answers. Sometimes mysteries endure not because they're unsolvable, but because they're already lost. Glacier continuing its slow work, moving forever downhill, carrying whatever falls onto its surface, releasing it decades or centuries later at its terminus. We are like glaciers in our way, carrying past forward through time, preserving memories and mysteries, eventually releasing them to future. Stardust was carried this way, physically by ice, culturally by remembering. Now you carry it too. This story of aircraft and mountains, of 11 lives ended suddenly, of 5 letters that mean everything or nothing. Sleep well, knowing that mysteries don't need solutions to be meaningful. Sleep well, knowing that ice preserves what time would otherwise erase. Sleep well, knowing that questions without answers are still worth asking. Sleep well, and perhaps dream of high mountains and patient glaciers, of aircraft that vanished and messages that resisted interpretation, of frozen moments preserved through decades before emerging into light again. Good night.